I think both the location is absolutely great to talk about books and literature. It's a pleasant Sunday morning. I enjoyed my day here.
I had a wonderful time at Literati. Thank you so much for having me over. A beautiful venue and a wonderful audience. It was great interacting with you all. Thank you, Chandigarh, for having me over.
This is one of the nicest, most pleasant lit fests I have been attending this season. It's well organized. It has a large variety of the kind of authors, and of course it's done in this very, very beautiful venue of the Lake Club.
Absolutely fascinating. I loved being on the stage. You have a beautiful, wonderful, interactive audience, very alive, very aware, and I'm very grateful to have been called here.
As Ambassador of Ireland to India, I'm delighted that Ireland is the country partner for Chandigarh Literary Society's digital edition of Literati 2020.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute honor and a great pleasure to welcome Embassy of Ireland as country partner to Chandigarh Literary Society's digital edition, Literati 2020.
We hope that you enjoy learning more about the connections between our two great national poets, Yeats and Tagore, and Kauvari Madhavan's fictionalization of the Irish Rebellion, which took place in Punjab a century ago.
Without getting into that complexity, essentially when an Indian uses the word dharma, it means trying to do the right thing.
The name of the game is not to seek that autograph and then keep it forever, but it is to respect that loving father, the mother, the brother, the colleague, the person that we are walking with, that friend who's around us.
I consider it my duty to help those people who are below the poverty line without thinking of any award, reward, recognition. No, because I have enough. Even though it is not there, it is ultimately the people actually.
So, ਪੈਗਾਮ ਦਾ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਚਾਮ ਆ। ਮੇਰਾ ਕਹਿਣ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤੀ ਜੀ ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਗਈ, ਚੌ ਜੇ ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਗਏ WhatsApp ਦੇ ਜ਼ਮਾਨੇ ਨਾਲ।
Sat Sri Akal, Namaskar and good evening. I am Niharika with you on behalf of Chandigarh Literary Society, an anchor and also a reader by profession. Robert Louis Stevenson, a name that we have grown up with, would often say, I keep 2 books in my pocket, one to read and one to write in. Now, this seemed like the perfect quote to introduce to you the 8th edition of Literati, which is the annual literature festival of Chandigarh Literary Society, because that is exactly what we are all about: reading, writing, and nurturing literary flavors alike. Thank you so much for joining us for this digital edition of Literati. Now, the first ever Literati happened in 2013 and also had Anupam Kher as one of the speakers, and we've grown over the years manifold with your love and your support, where we've had many, many other conversations along the way. And this year's CLS Online Conversations has seen your love and support as well. And today, I feel proud to tell you that we are not coming to you from just Chandigarh or just a few cities in India, but also Ireland, which is our country partner. We're also coming to you live from USA, from Africa. Technically, we are covering major parts of the world and many, many continents. I think that is the wow factor of going digital. And we have some very, very interesting conversations lined up for you as the evening progresses in the next few hours. Before that, Let's hear it from the chairperson of Chandigarh Literary Society, Dr. Sumita Mishra, an IAS officer and a prolific writer and poet herself, who has to her name several poetry collections, including Zara Si Dhoop and Petrikar being the most recent one. So without further ado, over to you, Sumita ma'am, to kick off this festival and to throw it open to all our wonderful, wonderful audience here.
Thank you, Niharika. Good evening, friends. I hope everyone is and their families are keeping safe in these COVID times. And on behalf of Chandigarh Literary Society, I extend a very warm welcome to all our viewers, to all our esteemed authors, to Literati 2020. Literati, as Niharika just mentioned, is our annual literature festival, usually and invariably held on the banks of the scenic Sukhna Lake, except that this year we are going to be face-to-face on the digital platform. And over the years, Literati, we have played host to, I would say, some of the finest literary minds, both national and international, and had very meaningful discussions both on stage and off stage. And that and more is what we have planned and lined up for you in Literati 2020 as well. And as Niharika was mentioning, Literati 2020 is a truly global affair, because I think apart from South America, we have authors and poets from every continent, from every part of the world. And while there is a downside to our lives being so restricted, I think there's also a plus, because the digital medium has enabled connectivity on a scale that did not exist earlier. And I think many of our authors this year we are able to host simply because it is an online festival. So we are taking this very, very positively. Some of the literary stars who will be participating in Literati 2020, and I'm mentioning in no particular order, is Sudha Murthy, Chitra B, Divakurni, Rajdeep Sardesai, Gurcharan, Navtej Sarna, Anuja Chauhan, Ira Trivedi, Rakshanda Jalil, Jerome Armstrong, Erin Lucas, Sarabpreet Singh, Dr. Radhakrishnan Pillai, Dr. Janki Santok, Ashish Vidyarthi, and many, many more. A very warm welcome and our gratitude to them also. We also have a special partnership with Ireland, and as a result, we will be able to experience some of Ireland's finest writers. And the interesting thing is that among them is also an Irish author who is of Indian origin. So, it's truly a cross-cultural exchange. We have tried to carefully curate Literati 2020 so that there's a diverse mix, there's a diverse bouquet of literary flavors, if one can call it that, covering prose, poetry, screenwriting, children's writing, to name just a few. And keeping in mind the stresses and strains that this global pandemic has caused in all our minds and our lives, we have specially focused on sessions which are centered on well-being, on health, on spirituality, on happiness. And each day we have 2 to 3 sessions. Today we have, for example, a session on happiness, which is right after the inaugural. And we also have travel writer Anuradha Goyal taking us on a discovery of the sacred tales of ancient temples of India, since none of us can travel currently. And similarly, tomorrow we have sessions on mind and body, holistic well-being, and on yoga. And on day 3 as well, we have a session on superfoods and on the Vedanta and how to maintain work-life balance. So this focus, I do hope viewers will tune in, because it just helps, keeping a more well-rounded and holistic perspective that enables one to deal with situations of adversity and stress, as we are seeing, with more equanimity. On each day, we have a couple of plenary sessions. We have a good mix of sessions on children's writing, crime writing, poetry. I'm particularly, as a poet, looking forward to the session on mystic poetry from Tagore to Yeats, which again is one of our fusion sessions with Ireland. So, and we end on Sunday evening with a session first by Ashish Vidyarthi ji, then our Punjabi session on Punjabi screenwriting, story writing, followed Banerjee Divakurni, which will be the concluding session, and one that I personally am looking forward to also very much. So, as in every year, I would like to place on record my thanks to the entire team of CLS. Um, it's a very small and enthusiastic bunch of people, and as I say every year, that we do it for the love of it, and the team makes it fun. So, and when you're having fun, then nothing seems too difficult. To our team, to our moderators, to the media who has always been supportive, to our sponsors, and to all our well-wishers who have joined us, particularly in the last 8-9 months on the digital platform through our CLS conversations. Thank you so much. I hope all of you enjoy Literati, enjoy viewing it as much as we've enjoyed putting it together. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we present to you Literati 2020. Niharika, over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. As they rightly say that, you don't really need a new sunrise to start over. You only need a new mindset. And this is us trying to make the most of this new normal coming to you digitally. And like we promised, now heading over to the first session of the evening, the inaugural. Ladies and gentlemen, they say that the number 3 holds immense and significant value in the Indian culture. For example, we need 3 deities or we need 3 gods to run the entire world: Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. And on the other hand, if you look at the other side, Bollywood is ruled by 3 King Khans. So this session is all about trilogies and the number 3. And to take this session forward, we have a special speaker amidst us. We best know him as the CEO of Procter & Gamble India and the managing director of Procter & Gamble Worldwide for strategic planning. At the age of 50, he took early retirement to become a full-time writer, and he writes regular columns for the Times of India and 5 Indian language newspapers, and contributes to the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and Foreign Affairs. And this evening is going to be about his much acclaimed series on the classical Indian goals of life. And he is going to be in conversation with our moderator, who's the resident editor of the Indian Express and author of a book on Punjab militancy called Dreams After Darkness. Now, our moderator has also worked as a consulting editor with development organizations such as United Nations Environment Programme and Asia Pacific Adaptation Forum. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you our guest this evening, Mr. Gurcharan Das, in conversation with our moderator, Manraj Grewal. Manraj, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Das. So without much ado, because I've been told a good moderator is one who gets the author to speak the most. So I've always wondered, every time I see or read your CV, how did you combine these 2 hats? You are a very successful corporate head honcho and a writer, and you did both of them with aplomb.
Well, I think of life as not finding yourself, but creating yourself. And at each stage, circumstances happen that you just pull you in a certain direction. And each time you then have to seize the opportunity. So, for example, I went to the university planning to do something useful, according to my mother, and which was to become an engineer like my father. But I discovered there the humanities, and I discovered Sanskrit. And I mean, this was at Harvard, and I was doing Sanskrit at Harvard. I was reading Aristotle, And finally, I got my degree in philosophy. And, and, and so I finished in philosophy. Then there was another moment. I had a scholarship to do a DPhil, a doctorate at Oxford in philosophy. And I was in Chandigarh, where my parents lived, in fact, Sector 9A, 71 Sector 9A. And what happened, I asked myself one day, lying down on the grass, did I want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? And I said no. I said I wanted a life of action rather than thought. And so again, I sort of created myself. I joined the company, and then I joined the company. But I did something unusual, and that is that I didn't lose touch with the life of the mind. I became a weekend writer. So it was a weekend writer. I wrote a play when I was 22. I wrote another one at 20s. I wrote 3 plays in my 20s. And then I wrote a novel in my 30s. A novel actually which is set in Punjab, and called A Fine Family. And even my first play, Lawrence Saab, was set in Punjab about Henry Lawrence, who was the first Britisher who came to Punjab in the court after the death of Ranjit Singh. Anyway, my point is, and then at 50, or in my late 40s, I came to work one day, and I was at the world headquarters of P&G looking after strategic planning. And I was looking at the market share of our brands, Ariel and Tide and Pampers and all these good Vicks and Oil of Olay and all good brands. And I asked myself, how long can an adult come to work and do this again and again? And so that's what precipitated. I mean, it was a crisis of sorts, but I decided to quit. My wife was a good sport. She agreed, and we came back to India. And I set myself up as a writer, began writing a column in the Times of India and other papers. And so that's how it all was combined. I guess my point is that many parents think of when their children, they think it's very important to make a living. And it is important to make a living. But one should always remember that one should also make a life. And so in making life, you can think about many ways. It's about finding one's passion. But in fact, it's, Mozart at the age of 3. I mean, he knew he was a musical genius, but most of us are not like that. We kind of stumble onto our passions. But it's nothing wrong. Even at very late in age, you can find it. And it is a source of happiness. I mean, the happiness is what? Happiness is simply to love the work you do and love the person you live with. So in that one line definition, you can think about making a life and creating yourself at each stage.
So how did the trilogy come into being? I mean, did you plan for a trilogy, which I think is going to become a quartet now?
No, I didn't plan for it. It sort of moved from, book to book, in the sense that when I first came back to India, the reforms were beginning to take place. I was very worried that the left was trying to scuttle the reforms. They said we had sold out to the IMF, to the World Bank, to America. And so the reforms needed to be defended. And that's what my early columns were about, defending the reforms. And in the process, I was asked by Nainan, the formidable financial editor, to go around the country. And he said to tell us how the country has changed after the reforms. This was mid and Sudha Bharashan. I my basic thought was how does a poor country become rich? And that's the theme of India Unbound, my first book. And that also happens to be on the first goal, the first Purushartha, which is Artha. And then, I mean, in that book, I predicted the rise of India. And I'm happy to say that India obliged by rising. And so, while prosperity was spreading in the country, middle class grew from 8% to 33%. 350 million people crossed the poverty line after 1991. And so we were on our way, and India had become the second fastest growing economy in the world. I still felt that there was a problem, and the problem was corruption. And so I thought I'd go to the Mahabharata, which is all about corruption, to find out about right and wrong, good and bad. And while I was trying to find a way to be good, I discovered the difficulty of being good. And that became the title of my next book. And so that's the second idea, moral well-being. And I'm not sure I got the answers there, but at least I've shown some ways to get there. And the third goal then was the goal of karma. And India is unique in elevating karma to a goal of life. And you know, the people, our ancients, thought about this, and they realized that desire, which is karma, is the source of all action. It's the source of creation. In the Rig Veda, the cosmos is born from desire in the seed of the mind of the one. And then, of course, there's the desire is the basis of procreation and the continuance of the human race. So very important. And that's when the third book called Karma, the Riddle of Desire, came into being. And the ancients even created a god named Karma. In fact, I think the sensible thing in India would be to change the name of Valentine's Day to Kama Deva Divas, and we'll take all the steam out of the Hindutvas in the process. So let's wait, February 14th. That's the date. Is it Valentine's Day?
Yeah.
Something like that. We should celebrate Kama Day. Anyway, so this is how the trilogy came into being. And now I think with the fourth book, it's likely to become the trilogy is likely to become a quartet.
So tell us
the fourth,
about the fourth book.
Well, the fourth book, the fourth goal of life is moksha. And I always felt this was beyond me because I thought of moksha as a spiritual goal of liberation from birth and death, from the cycle of birth and death. And I'm an agnostic, but so I thought, this was not something that I could be writing about. Actually, the mistake syncretic, and it was a mysticism where in our home he used to quote from Rumi, he used to quote from the Granths, he used to quote from Kabir and Mirabai and the various bhakti saints. And so in that very charged atmosphere, I had turned into an agnostic. Now, it's to my father's credit that he didn't push me in any direction. But while I was thinking about moksha, I You go to the Monia Williams, the great Sanskrit dictionary, and you realize that the original meaning of moksha actually is freedom, liberation. It's like a horse without a harness. That's the symbol, that's the visual they gave. Or a pearl who is freed from the shell of the oyster. That's freedom. But even in our day-to-day life, we say we've discharged the debt and we say, bhai mukti ho gayi hai. And so it's a word that can be used in a secular sense. And mine then, our book, is a secular quest for moksha. It also coincides with the fact that Penguin, my publishers, for years have been asking me about for an autobiography, because booksellers have tell them that readers want to know how this guy has managed to wear two hats all his life, and how did he manage to move from a business life to a writer's life. And so we want to know about it. And so I'm writing an autobiography. And the quest for moksha is a secular quest. And the secular quest, in my case, is very simple. And I think I'm not alone in suffering. I mean, the human bondage that we all experience from the fact that from day-to-day burdens, too much vanity, too much hypocrisy, too much envy, status anxiety, prejudice. All these are creations of our egos. And I think the idea of freeing yourself from the ego is also in the spiritual tradition, whether it's Shankara or whichever, Bhakti or whatever tradition you want. In the Upanishads, they are referring to this. And so a secular quest for moksha is a very reasonable project which I have undertaken.
And do you think moksha is every man can get a moksha?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I think that it's like the difficulty of being good. The reality is that the ego is very, very strong, because we need the ego for survival. And it's really very rare. But there are people, and you've met them and I've met them, people who are able to be, not so self-involved, to care for others, people who are considerate, they're kind people. Now, these are all liberations from that selfishness that our ego is programmed for. So we've met people like that. We've met people, and I think that's the quest. Now, it's a work in progress, so I don't know where exactly it's going to end up. But I have an instinctive feeling that I'm onto something. I have a feeling that you can achieve quite a lot. And, even a book like the Kama Sutra, which is a book about love and desire and so on, the things that it teaches the courtesan, it teaches the Nagarika, the man about town, are things which are exactly in this way. For example, the Kama Sutra says, look, if you want to be socially successful, don't talk about yourself. Talk about the other person. Talk about her. If you want to seduce her, talk about her. And it says, don't speak in Sanskrit. You'll sound pompous. Speak in the language of the people. Now, this is very good advice, because we all have a temptation to sound learned and pompous. We all have want to hold forth like those people on television, and news channels holding forth. So difficult to stop them. And so, I think that the fundamental issues, and frankly, I'm realizing that whether you're in the Buddhist tradition or the Hindu tradition or the Jain tradition or even the Christian tradition, there is a desire in all these traditions for this kind of liberation. And that's the answers they give are all different. Some talk about God and some talk about Brahman and Atman and so on. But ultimately, I think this part of it, the diagnosis, is the same.
A decade ago, you returned to the topic of India rising, and you wrote a book called India Grows at Night, and where you said that Indians are growing, Indians are doing well despite the state, not because of the state. So, is the present state more of a stumbling block or less of a stumbling block now?
Well, I'm afraid we are still there. I think India is still a bottom-up success, unlike China, which is a top-down success. The Chinese success was orchestrated by the state, by an amazing bureaucracy. India has India really is, we should celebrate that we have risen almost despite the state. But we shouldn't celebrate, because I think India, I said, India grows at night when the government sleeps. Well, India needs to grow during the day. And to grow during the day, we need to really do the governance reforms, the reforms of the police, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, and the parliament. For example, why should it take 15 years to get justice in the courts? That's ridiculous. This justice delayed is justice denied. Why should there be 3.5 million people who are waiting trial? Why should you and me, everyone is scared to go near a police station? Why is the police the handmaiden of the chief minister? And these, or in the case of the bureaucracy, why should one officer who's brilliant, who works hard and gets things done, works 12 hours a day, get promoted on the same day as another one who works 2 hours a day and does time pass because of the seniority system? That's, no organization should be run in that way. And how demoralizing is that? Then case of parliament, why should we have 1 out of 4 members of parliament with a criminal record? So these are what we need is, and it's not going to be easy, because India has always been a weak state and a strong society, unlike China, which has been a strong state and a weak society. What you need is a strong state to get things done and a strong society to make that state accountable. And so our problem for both China and India actually is that unless we achieve this, India to improve its governance and China to improve its politics, both are going to get stuck in the middle income trap. I really think that it's worthwhile dwelling on this China-India difference, because historically the Indian was defined by society, by your village, your jati, your family. The Chinese was defined by the state. The Ours was a history of kingdoms. Chinese history was a history of empires. The king in China, the emperor, gave the law and then he interpreted it. And he owned the property. In India, the ruler was the law, dharma, preceded the king. And it was the duty of the king to uphold dharma for the benefit of the people. So the reality is that we've always, and India's history was that of competing kingdoms. So I think in 1947, we could only have become a democracy. We can't be ruled with that iron hand. It's not. It's not in the DNA. But what we can do is we can improve our governance. So I mean, I think of India's history, contemporary history, in terms of three milestones. First milestone was 1947, when, well, we got our independence, but we didn't get our full independence, only our political independence. Our economic independence came only 40 years later in 1991. And then now we're waiting for another liberation, which is the liberation from the state of governance that we have when India begins to grow during the day. So we are still waiting for it. And frankly, if I were to give advice to Mr. Modi, I would say focus on these 4 reforms. The judiciary, and they're all, I mean, we know what has to be done. Reports have been written, the reform commissions have given, even the Supreme Court has, in the case of police reform, have said, you must do this, and it has not been done. So that is, I think, the unfinished business. And if Mr. Modi wants to go down in history, he'll go down in history if he does this far more than for other things that he's working on.
So you've seen India and Indians evolving over half a century. And of late, we've seen a lot of polarization. So how do you explain that? And can you use, again, can you go back to mythology to explain the fissures or the divisions in our society, which suddenly seem very deep-seated?
Yeah. Well, it's actually a global phenomenon, this polarization. Look at the United States. I mean, it is just as polarized as we are. And I think partly the polarization is due to the fact that there's been unfinished agenda in our country. We have, I mean, that's one of the things that in my next book, I'm trying to look at also the failures of our generation. And the failures of our generation, I think we have still not come to terms with partition. I think that we need to bring some sort of closure, and the brown Saabs just stepped into the shoes of the white Saabs without bothering to reform the colonial institutions and fashioning a new identity truer to the spirit of a free India. And the British sort of packed up and left in 1947, absent-mindedly leaving the English language. But that English language has given us it's been very positive, but it's also given us a headache because it's divided our country. I mean, just as we have divisions of caste and religion and regions and ethnic groups and castes. The very important division is between those who are comfortable in English and those who are not. And we've never done a full-fledged survey on this, but roughly about 15% of the people, I would say, at the most, would be comfortable. The trouble is this, that if you walk into a room and you don't, I mean, all the serious discussion in our country, whether it's in a boardroom, in business, or whether it is in politics or in the policy-making chambers of the government, they're in English. And the fact of the matter is that if you walk in and you don't understand English, you're deaf. Imagine being deaf in your own country. Now, this is a fault line. And the reality is, I mean, you're talking about Hindutva and the polarization there, but I think part of the origin is this, that there are people who are educated, bright people, but they never had the opportunity. And I think it's partly that resentment against, what is the resentment against the Khan Market gang or Lutyens Delhi? It's partly the resentment of those who got the chances to be educated and who are able to occupy places of leadership and policy making, and those who are not. So what Modi did was he brought, when he won in 2014, I mean, a lot of us were enthusiastic about it because he was promising Vikas. A lot of people voted for him because he would bring jobs, people. But it was also this desire that Chawala's son has become the prime minister, and even I can aspire to higher office. The problem is that you need education, you need time. And so today you have this polarization between the secular elite on the one hand and people who are, I would say, they can't talk to each other. Partly it's a language problem. Now this is one way to think about it. There are other fault lines as well. When we have not been able to well, let me leave it at that. Let me leave it at that because it will become a much more complex anthropological kind of discussion.
All right.
And let's just leave it at that. I think if you ask me whether there's a fault lines in the epics. Well, the Mahabharata is full of polarization between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, between and later, division between the Vaishnavas and non-Vaishnavas, because Krishna was first just basically a friend of the Pandavas in early times. Later he became a Kuldevta, and then he became the god, the Krishna Dev, which was Vishnu's incarnation. And so you have that, you have the Brahmins, the fault line, because the Brigu Brahmins, the Bhargavas, had rewrote the Mahabharata also, and that became somewhat of a caste fault line. I would say that this problem is a very real one. My own view is that India's basic DNA is syncretic, it is tolerant. In a country where you have 330 million gods, no god can afford to feel jealous. So I personally think this whole Hindutva project is pushing water uphill, because the average woman or man who goes to a temple doesn't think in that way. Now you can keep repeating a message and make people behave in a certain way, but it's not in our DNA. And I think, frankly, people will ultimately, I mean, the Bihar's latest election, the story was not the BJP victory. The story was Tejasvi's promise of jobs. And I think that we may be turning back to the right way of, doing politics and keeping religion out of it.
And do you have high hopes from our demographic dividend? The fact that a large chunk of our population is below below 30.
Well, I lost all my friends on the left when I wrote a column called Vote for the Demographic Dividend in 2014. Because, frankly, sorry, I'll just put my phone on silent. Frankly, I, like many people, was sick and tired of the corruption in the Congress party. We were not getting anywhere. So many projects were stalled, and it was really very, very looking for somebody else. And I thought Modi could provide that demographic dividend. Well, he has not. He has not. You have to do the reforms. He has recently done some good reforms in agriculture and the labor code, etc. But you need much more. We need much more. And you need to have an export orientation. Our exports have been stagnant. So if we want to create a demographic dividend, a demographic dividend people expect is not jobs like the Pakorawala jobs. You want decent jobs. That's what we elected Modi in 2014 for. And I mean, he gave us demonetization. And that was the wrong thing to do. So, I mean, everybody can make a mistake. But the reality is that we have not, so I'm not optimistic today. But Manraj, the basic fundamentals of our economy are still strong. And there are opportunities. Oil prices are down right now. And we have food self-sufficiency. We can be a major food exporter. We are already a major food exporter. We just have to I think these agricultural reforms are going to help in there. I'm still optimistic that if we just focus on the right things, and we know what they are, what reforms more that need to be done, and I mean, I would reverse this present day, this sort of protectionism that has come in. I would join RCEP. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, we have the opportunity. Once the COVID we get over it, we have the opportunity. And I just think it's going to be more difficult to get the demographic dividend. Right now, it looks pretty disastrous, that situation.
So now I think we have very less time left. So my favorite question to you, what is your tips for a writer, for a budding writer, since you've been such a successful one yourself?
Well, the beginning point really is to show up. Woody Allen said the secret of success, 80% of success is to show up, meaning that I am at my desk here in this room, in this study by 6 in the morning, every day, 24, every day of the year. Right from 6 till about 12:30. And even if I'm not, even if it's not going too well, I'm still there. I still show up. and I still try to write. And so I think really it is partly it is sweat, you know. Talent is one thing, but a lot is a discipline, uh, and frankly, that would be my advice to the writer. I mean, even when I was a weekend writer, you know, I was a weekend writer for 25 years, and I became a full-time writer for the next 25 years. So in these 50 years, even the weekends, I used to write at this schedule. And so you keep improving, you keep writing. I think my new book, I'm discovering a new light way. I've discovered, frankly, that the best way to live as I relive my life. In fact, you know, reliving, what's nice about writing an autobiography is that you relive your life. And you reliving your life is better than living it. It's like remembering an event is maybe superior to the event itself. And so in reliving my life, I find the best moments of my life is when I was light, when I was living lightly. And living lightly means you take your work seriously, but you take yourself lightly. You take your work, you take your work. In other words, don't take yourself too seriously. Take away the burden of the kind of things that the ego brings forth. And I think it's an idea, actually. Patanjali talks about it in the Yoga Sutras. One of the siddhis is lakima, in lakima. And lakima means lightness. And they, of course, describing the physical idea of the body being able to rise and levitate and all that. But it's one of the perfections. But I also think of it as the way to live, as the way to live. Don't take yourself too seriously. And so that's what I would tell anybody, you know, laugh a lot. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Das.
Sorry, let me just say, live lightly, not like a feather, that lightness, or a ball of cotton, but like a bird. A bird has agency.
It's lovely.
So
that is such a lovely way of putting it. Very poetic.
Thank you.
And if I may, you said earlier in the beginning, you said your idea of happiness. So what is happiness? What would you say is happiness?
Well, as I said, you know, loving the work you do and loving the person you live with is my one definition. But the second part, from the Purusharthas, I have learned that these are potentialities in us. Artha, Dharma, Kama, Moksha. They're potentials in us. And fulfilling that potential, achieving those capabilities that we have, is also a source of happiness. The problem, of course, is that many of these goals of life, they conflict often, such as Kama and Dharma. They often conflict. Because Kama is a duty to yourself. Dharma is a duty to you, to another person. So this is a constant conflict in our lives. I've in the middle of desire, I have a whole, this is one of the recurring themes of that book, the Kama versus Dharma.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. On this note, we'll thank you so much for a most enlightening discussion. I'm sure I'll go back to hear it again and again, to listen to it again and again. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
My apologies, I didn't realize I was on mute. So, those are the little nitty gritties that we need to be careful of while we're conducting a digital edition. And what I was saying is that those were some happy vibes being spread by our happiness partner, Radio Mirchi. And we've been receiving some very happy comments in the comment box. For instance, Anil Sharma ji says, "Good evening, all the literati buffs. Good evening to you too, sir. Good to be in August company through FB. Well, it's our pleasure, sir, that we're being able to reach you. And Parminder Soni ji also says, good evening, great to be here. Likewise, Parminder ji. And that was a great session indeed. Thank you, Manraj, and thank you, Gurcharan Das ji, for that session. Indeed, let us not get so engrossed in making a living that we forget to make a life. Which is what perhaps literary evenings like these are all about, appreciating the finer things in life. Since we've been talking so much about happiness, I was just wondering that they often say you can't be happy if you're worried about being liked. But is there another side to this coin? Can you achieve both of these opposites in one living lifetime? Well, we're about to find out because the next session is to be likable and to be happy. And to do the honors on this session, we have Jyotsna Mohan Bhargav. Jyotsna Mohan's recently released debut book called Stoned, Shamed and Depressed, an explosive account of the secret lives of India's urban teens, has been a bestseller without a doubt. And in addition to being a writer, she has worked with NDTV for 15 years as a senior news anchor and a senior news editor, and as a columnist for newspapers and magazines, not only in India, but abroad. So we definitely have one very qualified person to decode the idea of happiness for us. And the other most qualified person to talk about this topic is Naomi Datta. Naomi has been a television producer, presenter, and writer, working with a number of leading channels. And in her television career, she has worked with CNBC TV 18, Times Now, and the like. And after a few years, she quit television to move forward to the entertainment world. And she worked as a creative director and writer for shows on MTV, Star World, and Netflix. And if you've seen MTV or Star World quite a lot, then you would know, that creating content in the entertainment space is also a lot about happiness. And her latest book, How to Be a Likeable Bigot by Penguin, is a collection of satirical essays that celebrate conformity and bring forward ways to be perfectly regular, to blend in, and to be largely forgettable. Well, I'm guessing there is another side to this as well. And both of our qualified panelists are going to be in conversation with none other than Mr. Vivek Atre, who's an ex-IS officer, a motivational speaker, an author, a mentor to many, advisor, columnist, and visiting professor. And he has 8 TED Talks and 3 highly popular Josh Talks. Now, if you ask him, life isn't about the marks that you score on a test, but it is always about making a mark. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you the next session, to be likable and to be happy. Over to you, Vivek, sir.
Here we are. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Niharika, for that introduction. A wonderful session with Mr. Gurcharan Das and Manraj Grewal Sharma. On behalf of Chandigarh Literary Society, it gives me great pleasure to invite everyone. I'll take this opportunity to say that it's a fabulous thing that we can get together for Literati once again, although online. We're missing the lake club, we're missing the view of the lake, the smell of the fresh air and everything. But as Sumita Mishra, the chairperson, said in the beginning, we are going to have hopefully one of the most widely watched and widely discussed festivals ever. I have with me 2 ladies who are very accomplished and whom I know well now. A very warm welcome to Jyotsna Mohan and Naomi Datta.
Thank you, Vivek. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so we'll get down to this, and since we're talking about a little, perhaps not very clear from the title about what we're going to talk about, but I'm going to get straight to the books first. We have very talented panelists here who are diverse thinkers, who have obviously been through life's ups and downs, if I can say so. Everybody does. And they are both from the media, both from television, well-known faces and well-known personalities in their own right, and thinkers, obviously, on society. But today we're talking about young people more, and young people are of interest to me as well. A great interest in what they think, what they do. Do they try their very best to be successful and fail and then never get over it? Or do they rise from the ashes and bounce back and, somehow make it despite not being accomplished enough or whatever it is? Society expects them to break the mold, to shatter all ceilings of marks and brilliance and excellence. And each parent thinks that their children are the best and cannot be matched by anybody on the planet. Parents are probably the problem in many cases. But as Jyotsna will tell you, this is not going to be about parenting. And I'm going to start with Jyotsna. And basically, Jyotsna, your book looks at the problem. It looks at the youth. It looks at how they are getting into depression. They're getting into gaming. They're getting into reasons for depression and even getting into drugs. Now, this problem has been there for a while, but social media technology has obviously compounded it. We have problems which we never faced, let's say, 100 years ago. Drugs were probably coming into fashion, if I can say, in the 1960s. I don't know much about the history of drug taking before that, but I was born sometime in the end of that decade. And nobody has ever approached me in my life with drugs or something that, okay, here you are. So I've been pretty aloof to that. But what is the problem that you have investigated, Jyotsna, in your very detailed book, and in which you've obviously done a lot of research? Why don't you talk about that to start off?
Okay, so there are so many reasons actually, Vivek, but I think as you mentioned, social media, I think has a lot to answer for, a lot. I think everything today is dictated for these children, by social media. It's that social dilemma is playing out across schools in urban India. I mean, when that documentary came out, I was so glad I'd written the book and it had come out before, because otherwise everybody would have said you've taken portions from there, because it was ... matching, But so everything is about social media. It's about who you are right now, and you need to be somebody. And I think it's all about very instant validation, quick gratification. Everybody wants to be popular. The peer pressure, I mean, Niharika spoke about the marks, and we should all be, make a mark. But it's tough when colleges like LSR, they're giving you 100%. What do you do? I mean, so they're fighting within themselves as well, because I think in our generation, Vivek, I'm closer to yours possibly than I am to Naomi, but in our generation, we did what we were told to do. If we had to get the marks, we had to get the marks, right? I mean, it didn't matter if we had the ability or we didn't have the ability. But the problem now with this generation is they too need to get the marks. I think the pressure is equal, but they're finding ways to go around it. So, if it's a backbencher and he needs to get the marks, he's going to go and try and get a joint and keep awake the whole night to study and get those marks. If it's a topper, he still needs to be part of that cool gang. He cannot be ostracized, because that's very important. So he's going to get the marks, he's going to study, still get the marks, but he's going to go get part of the gang, smoke up, because he needs to be cool. So, it's not just about the so-called bad children or the backbenchers. Everybody is fighting for an identity, and it's very scary because, when I wrote this book, I think across the board, I asked children, I asked everybody, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 17-year-olds, even 20-year-olds. I said, why is there so much angst in your generation? And honestly, I mean, they all say that, we're trying to fill something in within us. And in fact, to give you an example of this boy who was, I think at 13, he started smoking marijuana. And when I asked him, I said, so why? So he said, initially I just, I thought it's the cool thing to do. But eventually I landed up having a joint before I even went to the movies, because I wanted to, it became an experience enhancer. And my question to him was like, why is it that just the movies are not enough for you? Why do you need something to enhance even a movie experience? But this is how things are in urban India.
Seems like you've hit the nail on the head, and you've gone into deep thinking about this. And you've highlighted the problem, but we are going to come to solutions a little bit later in the conversation. And one of the solutions has been given by Naomi in her book. And Naomi, Niharika pronounced you as Naomi, and I know that you told me last time that both are correct, but I'm going to go with Naomi if you permit. So, Naomi, okay. So, Naomi, the thing is that you have talked about being a likable bigot in a tongue-in-cheek, witty way, but you've also given some excellent tips to the youth and people who want to succeed on the professional front, how to combat the deluge of social media expectations or other expectations, how to be a winner on LinkedIn and on WhatsApp and on Facebook and on everywhere, wherever they are. So, talk us through how you can be successful and, as you put it very wittily, without making too much effort, without standing out too much, and yet, somehow having your way and being likable and happy. How do you do that?
By reading my book. So everybody who's watching this, please go buy the book. But my book is a satirical book. I actually call it the anti-self-help book, because you have books which tell you that become the best version of yourself, and my book says no, don't bother, just be the way you are, be a potato. And this, honestly, 2020 is a year where everybody should be a potato, because this is the year for underachievement. This is the year to sit on your couch and not venture out of your house. This is the year to set the benchmark for achievement quite low, because this is the perfect year to be a potato and to read my book as well. But like I said, so it is a collection of satirical essays on how to sort of follow the path of minimum governance, so to say. Don't be largely forgettable. Don't be on the radar. You'll never. Don't be on the radar. Be under the radar. But obviously, like Vivek, it's not supposed. It's supposed to be a satirical portrait of how people are and how people don't take a stand. I don't want people not to take a stand, but if they don't want to take a stand and remain largely non-committal and therefore largely happy, they could read the book. Coming to what you said about social media, I was listening to Jyotsna, and she's so right about this validation that not just that generation, of course, with that generation, a lot more, with young millennials and Gen Z, a lot more, but even people like me, like, why am I on Twitter? I need that my Twitter persona and what I am could be two vastly different things, but we have now gone into this era of, where you're sort of gauging your self-worth by how many retweets you're getting, where your whole life can be led on Twitter and by the kind of interactions you're having. Now, move Twitter out of the equation, and for younger people, make it about Instagram. And it becomes this whole thing of how do I get people to like me? How do I get people to follow me? And you're just leading a parallel life altogether. So it's a trap. It's a trap of validation, which Jyotsna spoke about. And I think in my book, I also said that, why are we on Instagram? Mostly we're on Instagram because we want to put photos of ourselves, and with penny filters and say, wow, I'm quite good looking, But because you can't do that, there is this forced nobility that people put on Instagram. So you'll have the Rumi quote, like Rumi is such a favorite. So somebody will put a photo of themselves in the morning and say, oh, I'm a warrior today. But why are you a warrior? What have you done? You just woke up, no? So it is... It's a weird fake world, and like I feel like I've not read Jyotsna's book, but I've read parts of it, and I really feel that it is this little bubble that we're creating, this parallel bubble that we're creating, where we constantly need validation, which is scary. Really.
If I can just add, what Naomi was saying, I think it's about us as well, and I say that a lot. I say, the fact that for us also social media is such a new toy, in a sense that we haven't figured it out ourselves. And so if a parent is sitting and counting their lives, what are you going to expect the children to do? You can't tell them, what are you doing, when you're doing the same thing. If you're sitting in your meals and you're like, oh my god, how many photos, and okay, so we're just getting to Instagram, but a lot of our parents are still on Facebook or whatever. Or if all the parents are continuously putting every photo from the moment they wake up. And in fact, a lot of children have written in saying that they've been mortified by the amount that their parents are sharing. what do you do? What do you tell these poor children? Because hum log hi kar rahe hain itna sara,
Right. No, Jyotsna what and Naomi, I'm going to put things in a little bit in perspective, And also the perspective is that Naomi is in Mumbai, I guess, Bombay, and Jyotsna in the UAE, and I'm in Chandigarh. That's why I'm wearing a jacket, by the way. But the point is, but the point is that if you look at the bigger picture, I mean, I was a schoolboy in the 70s and the 80s also. And things were tense. We were like growing up in a time when, we were not really going out to restaurants. There was no social media. We would watch a black and white movie and a Chitrahar, and that was our entertainment. We used to play a lot of cricket, of course. And then the 90s were also like Bollywood was really bad. Music was bad. The cricket team was not doing very well, and we were like, I was at least at that time rising in my career, doing okay. Then the 2000 to 2010 period somehow, in my feeling, proved to be the least pressurized kind of decade that I have. Somehow that not because of my stage of life, but somehow we were not as under pressure as we are today. After 2015, or nothing to do with politics, there are so many things that have happened which are just, everybody today wakes up in the morning and is already under pressure to perform. I mean, in many ways, there's so many things that we need to accomplish somehow, and we can't find that peace within. And social media, of course, has a lot to do with it, and it can't be overemphasized. We spoke about validation. Now, validation, I must tell all of you, all three of us are probably eligible for blue ticks. Maybe not me, but none of us have blue ticks in our accounts. Why? Because we're probably, hopefully, not looking for that validation. The three of us. So, can we distance ourselves
No,
from that validation?
actually, if Twitter's listening, I don't mind. I want that blue tick.
As you want that blue tick. Okay, don't you have got it long ago now. You have thousands of followers now.
I haven't applied for it or whatever, but I'd be quite happy with the blue tick.
Okay. So you won the blue tick, but you have millions or lakhs of followers, you haven't got it yet. So the thing is that it's not probably top of your priority list, whereas there's somebody who says, if I've got 250,000 likes today compared to 350,000 yesterday, then I'm depressed. My bikini pictures or my gym pictures, in the case of anybody, are not being liked as much as they were last week. So Jyotsna, this expectation, this wanting to fit into the groove and wanting, like you said, to be a part of the cool gang, is it also applicable to societies in the lesser towns and even far away from Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore? How bad is this malaise?
See, I say that, anybody who has, who has that smartphone has that equal kind of exposure now. Okay, so I mean, maybe in tier 2 towns or, semi-rural or whatever, they're not watching the latest Netflix thing that they're watching in the bigger cities. But there's a different kind of exposure with that smartphone, including gaming. So stuff like PUBG, which I believe is coming back again. It was more rampant across, rural, semi-rural India than it is in the bigger cities. The bigger cities, it's a Fortnite and Roblox, but PUBG was singularly the most, popular game in India because it had penetrated across. And I mean, then it kind of leads to the same pressure. So many instances, again, through gaming of, people who've committed suicide because, somebody asked them to stop playing and go and work, or somebody asked them to go and study, they're hanging themselves, or they've been so busy playing that they've got mowed down by the train on a track. Unbelievable kind of stories. So I think the pressure is the same. The exposure is different, but the exposure remains immense across because of that smartphone. We're the biggest market for smartphone. I think some 30 million by 2022 or something like that. Ridiculous figures. So I think the more that the phone penetrates, the more our exposure to the better way of living. And we're a very aspirational society, Vivek. I mean, I see that. I've been seeing that actually. You see all these TV shows, like all these kids on, the Indian version of dance shows or singing shows, and it's their parents who are pushing them in to, achieve these, stardom as quickly as possible, because I think the parents are now trying to live their lives to these children in a more exposed environment. So I think, and that's the problem, because we're so aspirational, we probably don't realize that there are rules and there are checks and balances and there are boundaries. Right now, we're just all over the place.
That's
Vivek,
so right. And yeah, Naomi, I'm
Vivek,
coming
if I
to
could,
you. Go ahead.
if I could just add to, what she spoke about PUBG, there's also the entire, of course, TikTok is now banned, but if you look at the people who were famous on TikTok, or the TikTok creators, were not people like us, or they were not the people who are on Instagram or the people who were on Twitter. It was a completely different strata, but it was also, I also feel it was very democratic. Like, I don't want to run it down completely also, because it democratized content. It gave people, anybody, it gave them the power to be a content creator. So I guess what Jyotsna is saying is correct. You need to have those checks and balances. That is very important. But the good things which it did also cannot, like, for me also, being on Twitter has given me a platform which is not dependent on an organization that I work for. It doesn't matter which publication I work for, which channel I work for. It's like having my own private news feed. Similarly, so I feel like there's a lot of good which comes out of it, but like Jyotsna said, the checks and balances are a little skewed. That's what's
Absolutely
happening.
right. Absolutely right. And Naomi, I know that you have risen to become quite a Twitter star. But I must say that somehow what has happened in the last, I'm saying it very pointedly, in the last 1 or 2 years, the level of skirmish and trolling and civil war and whatever goes on Twitter is absolutely increasing. And someone like you who comes up with these very witty, and I've been probably following you for years and finding these fantastically witty posts about something which is otherwise either it's cricket or movies, but it's also at times about very serious things in society, like the pandemic or the lockdown. But now, I spend very little time on Twitter to find something that entertains me. I go straight to Instagram, which is a feel-good kind of thing, as you said, both of you. And then, I feel that these guys are obviously putting on their best face. So which is your preferred medium? Let's be very direct. And Facebook is obviously now for the I don't know if it's for the laggards, but I also go to Facebook, and our Literati is pretty much live on Facebook as well as YouTube. So what is your view on these platforms?
Okay, so Facebook was where I started, so it's always I'll always have a sentimental connection to it, but it's become more of a family and friends kind of place. And more and more I realize that people are not talking about politics and stuff like that, because it's become quite toxic there as well. But Facebook has now become this place where you sort of interact with your friends. I personally find Instagram very boring, but I feel that's the medium which is growing. And if you want to be an influencer of any consequence, you should be on Instagram, because being a Twitter influencer, kuch nahi milta. It's nothing. You're just giving your opinions for free, and not that I want to be paid for my opinions, but I'm just saying that now there was a time maybe 3 years back where Twitter was very big. Like movie trailers had to trend there. Movie stars wanted to be on Twitter, but because of how it's changed, the narrative has changed there. It's become so toxic. You will see more and more sort of entertainers move away from Twitter, which has already happened. Go and check, public figures, except for politicians. You'll see their tweets are hardly there. They've all moved to Instagram, because it's become a very toxic place, and which is really sad, because there's a lot of good again which can come out of Twitter. But unfortunately, they haven't been, and that's the problem of the platforms. They haven't been able to regulate fake accounts, troll armies, bots, trending hashtags. So I think it's a problem that all of them sort of have to introspect and clean up those platforms if they can.
But Naomi, sorry, Vivek, I'm taking over your role with a question.
You're both TV persons. I know you think. Go ahead.
I'm back to my acting days, and I'm taking over from you for one question to Naomi. Naomi, is it like cutting corners and taking the easy way out for these celebs who exited Twitter to go onto Insta, because there's always such a demand for them to stand up and speak and voice an opinion in these times and take a stand in certain times, which they don't. So, it's easier to be on Instagram and just, talk about...
Yeah, it is. But also, Jyotsna, the narrative has also changed on Twitter. It's just not a safe and happy place. It's not a safe and happy place for them to be anymore, because they're just, I don't think they're used to it. Like when you get so much adulation, you're on top of the world. You think, I have my fans and I have so many people who love me. And when it dawns on you and it is so intense, and if you ask me, undeserved, when it is so intense and so undeserved, they don't know how to deal with it, because how has it become so toxic? So for them, then you might as well go to an Instagram, which is a safer place. Of course, you have trolling on Instagram as well, but you don't have these hashtags which are trending. You don't have these bot armies which are attacking you all the time.
So we're left with the Kangana on Twitter.
Yeah, it is now hers.
Naomi, you're probably one of the only people who got trolled on Instagram. Not seen too much trolling on Instagram. But the point is that, yes, people are flitting away from Twitter there. Not that we want Instagram as a sponsor for Literati. We were doing okay. But the point is that you rightly said sometimes it can be boring. But let's move away from social media for a bit. Yeah. And Jyotsna, let's talk about what does one do? What is the solution? What is the way out? Why are we stuck with perceptions and norms and expectations and pressures and ways of thinking? Why can't young people just be? Why can't they be creative, make a flower? We all have kids, I guess. But why can't they just be themselves?
Very hard to answer. To give you an example, right here in my own house, I have a daughter who's like, can I get this tuition? Can I get this? And I'm like, no. Okay. So finally I said, okay, she's really hardworking. And I said, okay, you can, okay, maths once a week. Now I want twice a week, Mama. Okay. Finally gave in. Then she said, okay, now may as well get me science also. It'll just help me, And I am like, no. Then she's like, okay, Spanish. I'm like, no, you're really good in Spanish. I'm not getting you. No, I just need to increase it. So the other day, she didn't do really well in one of the tests, and she was really upset. So my husband came back and he said, we don't care. We only care about the hard work that you put in. We do not care about the marks. And she turned around, she's 12. And she turned around and she said, you both don't understand me. I care about the marks. So and this is a family that gives no pressure. Okay, Vivek, this is a family that encourages sports. Unfortunately, we've all before this, my kids were doing gymnastics and badminton also. Now they've all gotten stuck inside. And I think studies have taken over, but I don't know. I am not giving any pressure at all. So I don't understand, but this pressure is obviously coming from school or from their peers. It's you as a speaker, as a motivational speaker, perhaps should, take a lesson because we're failing, but it's obviously coming from somewhere. And I think the only thing that I say is that, that phone, keep pushing it as much as you can. I honestly, when I started writing this book, Vivek, I thought I'd be writing about 17-year-old, 18, 19, going into like the early 20s. But where I ended up was actually 8 years old, 9 years old. The epicenter was 12, 13. It was shocking that the 12, 13 of today is the 18, 19 of our times, So they are so exposed to everything. And I think it all comes down for the kind of exposure and, unlimited freedom that a lot of them have actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's totally like that. And I think that parents are largely to blame for the pressure on them. And of course, those who are millennials, they're born with technology wedded to them and embedded in them. They can't imagine the kinds of times that were before technology or before smartphones. So pushing that phone away is probably the answer.
But also, for the millennials, at least, I find that they're also then their way of living is a little bit different in the sense of their expectations or how they go around. Life is a bit different as well. I mean, I remember my previous job, which I a year and a half ago, and somebody who didn't turn up for the shift, and in the morning I called. I said, "Where are you?" And I've gone off to Corbett. So I said, do you not call and just ask, no, so you see if you can get somebody in for the shift, otherwise I can just quit. It's really as simple as that. Some of the millennials, I mean, my nephews, they don't know how to drive. They're in their 20s. Why don't you drive? There's Uber. Things are very different. And I mean, I got a shock when I started handling the millennials. So imagine the shock I got when I came to Gen Z, That's a whole different level.
Yeah, with millennials, what they say, this is the first generation which sort of still lives with their parents and and their parents have sort of provided for them. Like all of us, like when I first came to Mumbai to start working, I had to fend for myself, whether I was living in a PG or taking a bus or whatever. But with millennials, they have the luxury of parents who are quite well off. They're the products of liberalized India in that sense. So they have benefited from that, and it's great because I've had the similar experience as Jyotsna. They're very chilled, job guy to guy, it's fine. And I've had 22-year-olds tell me they want life-work balance, and I'm like, huh? Do some work. Then we'll talk about your life-work balance.
Loyalty is not part of it. Loyalty doesn't seem to be a part of that. Relationships can be broken in a WhatsApp, and then you go.
You can order romance on Tinder, so.
No loyalty. I mean, talk us through your years, and what is and also use this woke creation and this woke term, which I still want to know more about, which we discussed last time. So talk us through your career, and what is the current state of working, of being? Talk us through your woke waking up.
I'm not woke at all, which is so I've actually got a chapter in my book which is called How to Crack Woke Jokes, and the whole conclusion of the chapter is that you cannot crack any. If you're a woke person, you cannot crack any such joke. So I find wokeness actually very amusing, and you see a lot of. I learned a new word the other day. It's called performative wokeness, where you're displaying wokeness it's like a public performance, where everything you say can potentially offend someone else. I'll give you an example. It was not me. Some other Twitter friend had tweeted saying that, don't waste your time watching a series, read a book instead. Do any of you find anything remotely offensive in this? If someone says don't watch TV, read a book. Okay, so you guys have failed the woke test, because there was a person who responded to this person in complete seriousness saying, would you like to rephrase that, because there are a lot of people who can't read, so you're being you're being discriminatory. And it was a serious tweet. And there might be people who can read only in Braille, for instance. So, when you say read a book, it's a very sort of elitist kind of tweet. And so that guy was like, if you're reading this, you can read a book as well, like, get over it. And it was a perfectly serious exchange. Of course, this is a very extreme case of wokeness. Or, recently there was 25 years of DDLJ, which is a movie that we've all watched. And of course, it has some parts of it which are old-fashioned now. Obviously, it's been 25 years since it happened. But for its time, it was a fresh love story. It gave you Shah Rukh Khan. What do you have to complain about? But if you notice the kind of hate that film got on Twitter, because all the young millennials decided to put the filters of today's era on that film, and it became this whole thing of let's bash it, like of Friends, for example. Friends is something that we all love. The way it's bashed now, it's because people want to remove context and filters completely and just be like politically correct on steroids. Like, I call it political correctness on steroids. It's so correct that it's laughable, So
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you. You see, in government, we said that any file which comes to you can find a loophole in that. There was somebody who wrote a book against Mother Teresa, Pakistani. But anyway, you can find a loophole in Lata Mangeshkar singing also. I mean, if you're out to do something like that, I can find something, because that's my job, that's my way, that's how I am. So, but I have the comment of the day from Parminder Soni on the chat, which is that I agree that parents should tend to try their dreams through their children. They should go on and read Khalil Gibran instead. So,
read a book.
Gibran, I mean, abhi hum baat kar rahe hain ki people are discriminated if they say that you have to read. If you say read Gibran, then there's going to be another set of, Pandora's boxes coming out. Jyotsna, where do people find happiness then? In this literati, we try to put together ideas on finding peace and happiness, even though our session strictly doesn't really talk about happiness, because your book is on the malaise, the problems. But what is the solution?
Oh gosh, I think it depends. It's all relative, no, Vivek? On Twitter, people find happiness by bashing each other up or by being abusive and being toxic. So I guess, it depends on who, or, being one up on the other person. But really, I think at a younger stage, a younger level, I think communication, conversations, I think they're always the key. I think to sit and talk. It's always important. I mean, okay, so I tell my child, you're not doing something I haven't done. It's not like I haven't turned my back and walked off on my mother, or you're running in and out of the other one. I know exactly what you're doing, but I'll keep trying. It's not so, it's not like I'm not going to try. So it's not easy. They're not easy these days. Nobody wants to talk. I mean, you look at it politically, you look at it any way. You look at it in society. I think everybody's just so busy doing their own thing. But I think communication is the key. And I also talk about how I think it's very important to normalize things. I think we're still a very stuck-up society that does not, accept things, because if you don't accept things, you cannot move ahead. And I think even now we're like, oh my God, did you know about that kid who got, chucked out of school for being intimate or making out? But, at the end of the day, I turn around and go give that kid a hug. He made a mistake, yeah. Go give the parents a hug, I mean, imagine the embarrassment they're going. But I think it all comes down to our society, Vivek. And I think there's just so much of churning in society today. But I say that normalizing things is very important. It helps people, it helps children understand that things exist, We can't live in a void and say drugs don't happen in our society, or drugs don't happen around us, and nobody is vaping, or nobody's making out, or MMS scandals didn't happen, or we have to accept these things happen. Only then can we go ahead and deal with this phenomena of social media that has already exposed them on the side.
There's a lot of difference between the drugs and the rest of what you said, and I think drugs are the worst of any society. But Naomi, I want to talk about humor. Is humor one of the balms that can help? You're a humorist, but the sense of humor that everybody has differs to such an extent. One man's joke becomes the other's poke or joke or whatever, no joke, So how do we get into that humorous frame of mind?
I feel sometimes it's so difficult to write satire in the times we live in, because the things which are happening around you, how do you write? They're more ridiculous than anything that a satire writer can write. It sort of exceeds your imagination in that sense. So humor is also a very difficult it's unlike the US, which has its own problems. There is no complete freedom of expression here. You don't know who ends up getting offended. So being a humor writer or a stand-up comic, as you would know, is actually a very dangerous profession in India. Yeah, of course, humor can be a balm, but then you have to be careful about what you're joking about. What is this like? I'm telling you, for the last few years now, I'm very careful about how I phrase my tweet or what I say, and I think before I put down an opinion. I still put down an opinion, but I'm careful now, because you don't know what's going to happen, and who's likely to get offended. So it's a very touchy time to be a humor writer. Also, in India, we don't really get satire at all. We take things at face value. So, agar koi kuch bol raha hai, then you're like, this. So there are many times that I write pieces where the editors actually write satire. So I'm like, it's very self-evident that it's satire. They're like, no. We don't want to take a chance. We have to classify it as satire. And just coming back to your question, really, I think the panel before this, Mr. Gurcharan Das was there, and I think what he said is what we should all follow. That don't take yourself too seriously. Take your work seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously, and that's the only way to go, I guess. I think he
I think
sort of
you're
summed up.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. I think we're coming to the end, but I'm going to ask you one more question each, and that is, what are you on to next? I mean, obviously moved on from television to becoming authors and doing other work. And Jyotsna, I mean, many more books in the offing, many more creative projects in the offing. What is happening now?
Yeah, I'm hoping, Vivek.
Hoping,
Inspiration
I
is
mean,
coming.
you're doing something about it.
Yes, I have to stop being, now I'm at that stage of the pandemic where I'm like, oh gosh, I think it's weighing me down finally after all these months. So it's a little bit more of an effort to, get going than it was about a few months ago. But yeah, hopefully I have a couple of ideas for the books. So, hoping to get another one going now, and I think it's a good time to get back into it. At least it keeps you going till this pandemic is over, and then figure out where I go from there, because figure out whether I want to go back to TV. Media is also another story right now. It's an unhappy place.
We should probably just keep doing these conversations, and maybe once a month or something get in some other people and just have some fun instead of
I am thinking. Yeah, I think so. I think, it keeps you going, it keeps you connected, because a lot of people have actually come up to me and said, now you've written this book, you need to take it forward. And, the kind of feedback that I've got, especially from 20-year-olds, who've spoken about mental health, has been enormous, Vivek, enormous. The kind of, people who've written in, people I know, I mean, they're children. And they've called me quietly on the side and said, please don't tell anyone, don't tell our parents we're calling you, we're dealing with anxiety times. So I think these are issues that, we need to speak about a lot more openly and a lot more often. So hopefully that's another thing on the agenda.
Right. And Naomi, how about you? What are you on to?
So I found it very tough to write during this year, because I became this sort of amateur epidemiologist, and I was reading up on corona like I was going to come up with the vaccine. So I was very obsessive about it, for a bit. So I've not written much. I work on projects. So I have a show coming up next week on Netflix. So let's see how that does. And there's some other stuff happening.
Wives? Is that the one about the Bollywood wives?
Yeah, it's a guilty pleasure show.
Congratulations, Naomi. I want to see it, by the way. I saw the promo. I'm going to see it.
It's full guilty pleasure to me. Please enjoy. Yeah.
Well, ladies, this is your chance to show us the cover of your book. Do you have it handy, anyone? Then why don't we all, even mine came out this year, so I'm eligible. So here we are. These are our books, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm not covering. Okay, here we are. You can smile for the cameras before we say goodbye, and thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Get 3 free, 2 free. No, buy one, get 2 free.
Been absolutely a pleasure and a joy, and we were just being ourselves to entertain or enlighten or kind of interest anybody in whatever we do. So thank you for joining us, and Literati Online has been a joy to organize. Some of us are working very hard, and there's a team behind it. But a pleasure to have you all the way from Bombay and all the way from the UAE. Good wishes. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye, Naomi.
So that was To Be Happy and To Be Likeable, coming to you live from Mumbai, Chandigarh and UAE. And Jyotsna, don't worry, I've taken that screenshot for you. I'll have it sent. And what I found very refreshing here was to see the fans running in Mumbai in Naomi's background, because we are almost going to be freezing here in the north. So that was some pleasant memories of the summer this year. And I've been running my eyes through the comment section on the right. I've caught on one comment which says, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If it can't be on stage, digital we must. So that's enormous encouragement for us, and very poetically put by Mr. Chitranjan Agarwal. And my sources tell me that we lovingly call him Chatty here in Chandigarh. So thank you so much, sir, for watching us and for being here with us. It's a pleasure to have you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, on to the next. When J.K. Rowling came out with the Harry Potter series, sometime in the 90s maybe, it was widely said that she has awoken an entire generation to reading. Now, I'll just add my 2 cents here, if I may. Definitely, she woke up an entire generation to reading. And that reading made this generation take up to writing. That's what I believe. And why I also say that is because every passing year, the average age of a best selling writer is getting younger and younger. Take, for instance, our next young author, who is a third year student at National Law University, Jodhpur, already writing poetry, satirical fiction, and literature reviews. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me now invite on the dais, on our virtual digital dais, our young author, Bhavya Kriti.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for having me and for introducing me so nicely. I'm so grateful to be here today.
Well, it's
And
to have you, you know. Go on, go on.
I'm so grateful to be able to share this platform with people who have so much experience and just so much information and knowledge to give me. I've attended the 2 panels before and I've learned so much in the time that I've been here and listened to the conversations.
Well, I'm glad, and I'm looking forward to hearing you read some of your stuff. So I received some of it in advance and I've read through it. And I want you to read it out to the audience as well to let them know how the young generation has taken on to writing and what thoughts they have put into it. Go on, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So the first piece that I'm going to be reciting today is a piece titled Unfinished Idea. So if I may proceed. Someone smells constantly like wet laundry. Hair escapes from the loose elastic strung up high on her head, but nothing else at all escapes from her arms. The bags slung across her shoulders aren't weight as you think. She unloads the troubles of her day into a clean sink. The bowl of fruit is inhumanly polished. Bright glints or beams or strokes of yellow white light drawn from end to end of the dining hall. Nothing at all escapes from her hands. They bind tight like black rubber bands.
Great, great. So, like I told our audience, you know, you have such deep thought over there. I also got a few poems which were untitled. So, any specific reason for not titling them? If you can just tell me in very short and, you know, briefly.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, when I do start writing my poetry and my pieces, it comes together with a lot of thought. And I try to put a lot of thought into every single one of my sentences and every single one of my stanzas and construct them in a way that they have many ideas surrounding it. So once I actually finish writing my piece, it takes me a lot of effort and I'm not able to discern what exactly is the most important part because I feel like I would be really doing injustice to the rest of the parts of my poem because it feels really unjust to do that, to give focus to one particular aspect of the piece that I've written. So mostly I do end up leaving my pieces untitled, and that creates a bit of confusion because people do expect poetry and art in general to be titled. But I feel like today, because of the fact that there is so much art, just leaving some stuff untitled would not be an issue.
Well, I don't think you need to mind that, you know, like Shakespeare said, that what's in a name, a rose would smell just as sweet if you call it by any other name. I think now's the perfect time for you to read us a piece called Untitled. It could be any, you know, which one is your favorite. Go ahead with that.
Okay. So the piece that I'm going to be giving out now is also, as I mentioned, a piece called Untitled. And if I may proceed, fatigue rests at night, and mornings don't care much for sunlight. The rubber elastic of the day twangs sharp by 5. The malleable watch hand, my hand watch or wrist, hangs around my bluing finger. It knows time or stop knowing. When I stop looking, I wouldn't know. Maybe the watch hands have slithered out like baby snakes that slink away from the rusted bathroom sink like there may be no tomorrow. My bottle of hydrochloride will tell you that is.
Great, great, Bhavya. And I think, as per the time, as per what the clock is telling me, I think we'd love to listen to another piece. And because the clock is running by so fast this evening, I think we can have just one more piece. So, why don't you go ahead and read us another one?
Yes. So, my last piece for today is a piece titled Binary Fission. I've written it in a bit of a comical sense. So, it's a little different from the pieces that I did right before, that I was reciting before this. I had left 2 cups on the kitchen slab, one stained with the yellow sugar of a tangy lemon, one so fresh and white I could hide it on my sheets. My mother stood horrified, paralyzed in fear before the crime scene I had created. What were wars and modern play when chaos and order stood together at her door? And she could fend for herself and I with only a plastic seat. I swore I had no memory of why I released havoc, but she wouldn't hear it. My mother stood with a cup in each hand and wondered whether to turn right to the sink or left to the shelf. I thought I should gracefully ease her task and lend her a hand, but she probably wouldn't know which one to split. She still stands there today. I am growing old and she is splitting.
So there you go. That was Bhavya Kriti with us, and a law student, so young, 19 or 20 years old, if I'm not wrong, and such deep thought in her poems. Thank you so much, Bhavya Kriti, for being here at CLS 2020. Great to hear from you, and keep writing till the time that you can, put all your thought into your words. Good luck to you. And
Thank you so
now,
much, Nihar.
thank you. Now, moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, so I would just like to take a minute to acknowledge the love and support of our sponsors right here at this moment, because without them, this wouldn't have been possible. Our country partner is Embassy of Ireland, and in association with Harida, HSAMB, HSIIDC, and our happiness partner is Radio Mirchi 98.3 FM. Thank you to them for all their love and support. And this is probably the time, times like these, which bring about the true spirit of collaboration. And we are really, really lucky to have been able to collaborate with the Embassy of Ireland as our country partner. Why don't we take a short look at our association, which has been formed in these past few days?
As Ambassador of Ireland to India, I'm delighted that Ireland is the country partner for Chandigarh Literary Society's digital edition of Literati 2020.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute honor and a great pleasure to welcome Embassy of Ireland as country partner to Chandigarh Literary Society Digital Edition, Literati 2020.
We hope that you enjoy learning more about the connections between our 2 great national poets, Yeats and Tagore, and Kauvari Madhavan's fictionalisation of the Irish Rebellion, which took place in Punjab a century ago.
Our gratitude to the Embassy of Ireland for being our country partner. And ladies and gentlemen, now moving on to the next session on our agenda. What we do in life echoes in eternity is a saying which all of us have heard. We may only be leaving transient footprints on the sands of time, but we believe that every transient footprint has the power to change history and to change it for the better. Now, that's only a glimpse of the session that is going to come ahead, which is titled Tracing Footsteps. And on this panel, we have wonderful, wonderful authors, the first of which is Kaveri Madhavan, who was born in India, has her roots in India, and moved to Ireland 33 years ago. She's the author of 3 books of fiction titled Paddy Indian, The Uncoupling, and The Tainted. And Kaveri has written for the Irish Times, Irish Independent, Evening Herald, the Sunday Tribune, the Phoenix, and Travel Extra. And currently, she is working on her 4th novel. And next on the lineup, we have Mr. Navteej Sarna with us, who's the well-known author of The Exile and We Weren't Lovers Like That. A member of the Indian Foreign Service since 1980, he served as an Indian diplomat for nearly 4 decades in places as diverse as Moscow and Warsaw. So definitely there is a lot of cultural layering to his writings. He's also served in Thimphu and Tehran, among the many few places that he's been at. He retired from the diplomatic services in 2018 as India's ambassador to the United States, and he's now a full-time writer. And leading the panel is going to be our moderator, Colonel Avnish Sharma, who was commissioned into the Armored Corps during December 1980. And he opted for premature retirement in 2007, from what I know, and he's now settled at Chandigarh. He's a prolific writer for service journals, and he's a regular guest columnist with Hindustan Times, and he also writes middles for the Tribunes. And his writings have a peculiar bent towards the lighter side of life, with an uncanny ability to connect everyday happenings to his writing, and with interesting anecdotes and real-life experiences during his years in the Indian Army. That's a side that we can never get enough of, and you must have seen him on CLS Conversations in the past few days. So over to you, Colonel Avnish, to take the panel forward.
Good evening, Jayant. How are you, Kaveri?
All well, Colonel Saab, all good. Looking forward to this.
Okay, all okay?
All okay, thank you.
Yeah, Kaveri, with this, I was seeing this wonderful audiovisual on Ireland, Wilderness Ireland. Why is it? Why this tagline?
I think it's because the footage was actually from in the coastal path that runs a coastal. How would I describe it? It's a roadway, a walkway. You can cycle it, and it's called the Wild Atlantic Way. It's a coastal path that runs down the coast of Ireland from north to south, and then further down east as well. And I think it was just a representation of that. I have to say, my heart just filled with absolute pride to see Ireland being shown off so beautifully, so beautifully.
Yeah, there is a smile on your face, and in your writing also there is a lot of positive vibes about Ireland. Tell me, are there still no snakes in Ireland? I remember reading a short story by Frederick Fawcett some years back, in which it was titled "There Are No Snakes in Ireland." Does it hold good till now?
Absolutely, there are no snakes in Ireland until maybe a month and a half ago, when much to a housewife in Cork, I think it was, much to her shock, a consignment of marble from Agra, from India, arrived, and in it, out of that came a very venomous snake, and her son, I think only 7 years old, discovered it, and it made headline news. But otherwise, no snakes in Ireland.
Okay. Navteej and me have one thing in common. Both of us were born in Jalandhar. In fact, all three of us have a thing in common about Jalandhar, because in The Tainted, that is your latest novel, the plot is set in Jalandhar. Am I right?
Yes, I mean, the actual mutiny of the Connacht Rangers, has a connection with Jalandhar. But of course, I fictionalized the regiment when I wrote the book, and I set it actually in the Nilgiris. But yes, I mean, Jalandhar has a huge connection to the mutiny.
Yeah, and my end sources say that we also share an interesting sport called golf.
That's right. Colonel Saab, you have to come to Ireland. We have the most wonderful golf courses here, as you know.
I know. I'm very fond of Rory McIlroy, and Ireland has got some wonderful courses, and the weather is so good. Let's see. Okay, we'll start off this session of Literati 2020 titled Tracing Footsteps. And before we get on with your particular works, can I request you, Navtej, to tell us how did this fascinating journey of being an author and a writer start, especially in your case when you were a career diplomat? And one can imagine the kind of commitment they have and the travel that they do, and tight row, especially in your case where you were for 6 years the face of the government, the official spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you took time off writing your Tales of Poland, I think was published in 1991. Could you tell everybody about your journey, this fascinating journey of writing?
Well, thank you, Avnish. Yes, it has been a fascinating journey. I wouldn't change a day of it. And it's not been easy because you're balancing basically two vocations, two almost full-time careers, as it happened in my case. Of course, my main career was diplomacy and the Indian Foreign Service, but I began writing before I became a diplomat. So I was writing. I was a journalist in the 70s. I was a university correspondent for the one-time famous evening news of the Hindustan Times, and I was writing feature pieces and book reviews and all that, even from my university days. So when I did join the Foreign Service, I think one of the reasons actually was that it wouldn't compete with my writing in the sense, and I found it that if you played it right and you wrote the right kind of things, you didn't have to write politics or foreign policy. And if you didn't do that, then it gives you enough space, it gave you enough experience, it gave you exposure to different cultures, different people. It really broadened your horizons, and so that actually helped my writing, and my writing helped my diplomacy, because again, you're playing with, your tools are your words in both the profession. So I think the diplomacy was strengthened by the fact that I was into the written word and reading and writing. So that's how it happened. And during the career, I started writing. I wrote journalism. I wrote short stories. But nobody would print the short stories because they said you need to write a novel. So I wrote my first novel, which was We Weren't Lovers Like That, in 2003. And the short stories kept coming out in different magazines. And finally, they came out as a collection, Winter Evenings, in 2012. And alongside that, after my first novel, I wrote another novel, which was mentioned, The Exile. I wrote a travel history. I wrote essay books, and a collection of essays, and I did some translations. So again, it was a question of finding the time in 24 hours to do everything. And as somebody from the army, you would know that you count your day in minutes and seconds. So similarly, here also, I have always counted my day in minutes and seconds and seen how much I can squeeze into it.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's very. And Kaveri, you are not a literature student. What I know is that you did eco, and you were. Your father was in the army. Of course, you would have traveled a lot in India. And I personally, I find that any lady who's not working is busier than a fellow or a lady who's working, because she has to manage everything. You manage your husband, you've got 3 children, you migrated from India, and you are 33 years now into Ireland, and you have some really time consuming hobbies like golf and gardening, and still you find time. Let's hear from you. How's this fascinating journey of yours?
Well, I'm not a very disciplined writer. There's a lot of procrastination that goes on in my life on a day-to-day basis. So, how I managed to write 3 books, I think, my whole family just thinks it's a miracle. But I've been very lucky, Colonel Sabai. My husband is extremely supportive. He's beyond the call of duty supportive of my writing. and we've always had a very equal marriage, and I think that really adds, that really helps you as a writer, because you're never guilty then. You don't feel that, oh, I'm writing, I should be cooking, or because if I have a good writing day and I haven't cooked, it's never an issue. So I think having a supportive partner is very helpful, in anybody's writing journey, whether you're a man or a woman. So that was a huge help to me. And most of I started my writing career when after my children were born, and my kids they've been good kids. They've as they grew older, they were very appreciative of the fact that that their mother was writing, and if I was in the zone, as you'd call it, they would be very sort of respectful of that. So that's a great thing. I mean, I have my family right behind me, and I have to thank them for it. So that's my story anyway.
And your first novel, The Paddy Indian, it's out and out your love for your new country, and your experience of migrating from your host country, your home, different environment, culture altogether. Tell us something about, briefly about The Paddy Indian.
So, Kansa, when we arrived in Ireland in 1986, we came straight from Madras, from Chennai, to a very, very small rural town in a rural county, called Sligo, and we lived in Sligo town in County Sligo, and far from when we were growing up in India, you had this notion of what the West was going to be like. It was all going to be just sex, drugs, rock and roll, and then we arrived in Sligo, which was so ultra conservative. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how conservative Ireland was compared to India, in 1986, because obviously the church had a fairly strong influence on the country. And it was a culture shock, but actually nearly in reverse, because we were expecting one thing and it turned out to be exactly the opposite. But the love for Ireland just came, I think, just the people are really lovely. The country is just so utterly beautiful. I mean, you have to just come to Ireland to see how very beautiful it is. And I know Navtej was in Belfast, because I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival and heard him speak. And I'm not quite sure whether he had an opportunity to see Northern Ireland at all. But I mean, even Northern Ireland is just so stunningly beautiful. The coast and inland, the mountains, the lakes. It's just a wonderful country. And I think for myself and Prakash, coming from Chennai, which was, a city of 9 million when we left, to come to, at that time, Ireland only had, barely 4 million people. So, it's sparsely populated and so beautiful. It was absolutely fabulous. We loved it, and we've loved it ever since.
Great. Navtej, yours is a wide canvas of work, fiction, non-fiction, history, travel. The first work of yours, what is that? We Weren't Lovers Like That, was ironically the only fiction so far. But from my own sources, I gathered that now you are more inclined towards writing some more fiction. Now, this particular novel, I somehow got a feeling that it was the guy who was the main character was a little despondent with his life, and he wanted to get back in time, and that is the kind of story that it was.
Well, yeah, thank you for taking me back to that. But I must say that that's not the only work of fiction. The Exile is a work of historical fiction, and Winter Evenings is a collection of short stories, which I hope will be regarded as fiction.
Of course, short.
So all these are fiction, 3 books. Yes, We Weren't Lovers Like That was my first novel, and it was it was written around the turn of the century, around the millennium, actually turn of the millennium. And it was about a 40-year-old person who suddenly finds life sort of slipping away from his fingers like a bar of soap, and everything is crumbling around him. His wife leaves him with their only son because she prefers one of his good friends. And he is having problems in office. He can't sort of relate to the kind of changes that have come in office politics, etc. So he then just goes into a journey which is as much into his future as into his past. So the whole book is structured around a little train journey from Delhi to Dehradun by the Shatabdi Express, which, as you would know, takes about 5 or 6, 7 hours. So in that journey, he is actually reliving important aspects of his life, and he is also going towards a hope of recovering, recouping a lost love, which hopefully will meet him in the end. The book really doesn't tell you if he does or doesn't, but there is that sense of hope at the end. So in a way, it's about lost opportunities. It's about regrets. It's despondent to begin with, but then it's also the journey of coming out of that despondency, which the book describes. So I really enjoyed writing that book. It was a very freeing experience.
Oh, that's nice. And what is the next project on a fiction novel?
Well,
I mean,
I don't know if it will become a novel or not, but certainly I have tried to finish what I have tried to finish. It's a largish work on the Punjab of 100 years ago. It's a book of fiction set around the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, but not about the massacre alone. It brings in a lot of other things that were happening in the Punjab 100 years ago: the return of the First World War soldiers, the Gadar revolutionaries, the revival of the cultural religious institutions, the building of the canals by the British, all that was having a socio-economic impact, plus into which came the freedom struggle, the Satyagraha, and the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh in 1919. So that is, again, a work of fiction based on a historical event. As Kaveri would relate to this, how you take an event and then you sort of fictionalize things around it. And that's what that book is. It is still not been taken by a publisher, so hopefully we'll hear soon.
Great. I think it should be very interesting. Kaveri, now this, personally, purely personally, the uncoupling. I got an impression that it is talking of redundancy of orthodox arranged marriage, Indian arranged marriage, and in the wake of greener pastures, it is further deteriorating. And what do you have to say about this? I may be wrong.
Well, I tell you, Colonel Saab, I started writing the book. It was to be a critique of the Indian marriage, of the arranged marriage. But as I wrote the book, the main character was to be a villain. Like, he was to be, I was going to castigate him. But as I wrote the book, I ended up being quite sympathetic to him. And it was a very strange thing. I didn't set out to write a book that was going to be sympathetic to the man in the arranged marriage, but that's how it ended up. And in the end, it was actually very sort of. I think I actually made a case for arranged marriage, rather than the other way around, which was unexpected even for me as a writer. It's just sometimes your character just makes you do strange things, I think. So.
Yeah, I could make that out. Navtej, your book on Nanak is really, I must confess, has inspired a lot of people to dig deeper into his teachings and his travel. Uh, because the other day also I was mentioning to you that this came about in the Military Literature Festival last year on the 550th anniversary, and it was really interesting, a great eye opener. Maybe have some excerpts of his teachings and their relevance, please. I mean, for our viewers to listen to it.
Well, well, this is the book. So, it's I didn't expect to do a reading from it, but I can tell you that this is a very sort of simple, straightforward book, which was essentially written in a period of 3 or 4 months and it was meant for the lay reader who knows nothing about Guru Nanak and then picks up this book and should get a fair idea of his life and teaching. So I think essentially what this book brings out is the context of Guru Nanak when he came into this world, what was happening. There was a time of heavy ritualism, there was discrimination, it was a caste-ridden society, it was a superstition-ridden society. And he traveled a lot. He traveled in 4 different directions, and it's fairly well known that he went as far north as Tibet. Even if we take the most conservative travel estimates, he went east up to Assam. He went south up to present-day Sri Lanka, and he went west. He went west certainly up to Mecca, Medina. Of course, there are thoughts and there are stories that he went to Jerusalem and he went to Turkey and all that, but that has not been proven, so to speak. So these 4 major journeys or udasis he did do, and everywhere it was to show essential things like the oneness of God, the equality of man, the right way to worship, to move away. Why are you worshiping in a way that you are? What does it actually mean to go away from ritual and go to the core of the teachings of every religion? It was not against any religion, whether it was Hinduism or Islam. He just went and debated with the holy men of all religions to show them that what is the real way of going into life, going about life. And the critical teaching was that God is not to be found by running away from this world. He's not to be found in forests and mountains and caves and so on. You have to live in this world because this is God's creation. And you have to live in the right way. And you have to, as the 3 basic things go, you have to work hard, you have to remember his name, and you have to share in charity. So the last 20 years of his life, he came back after his travels, settled down in Kartarpur on the banks of the river Ravi. Now you hear a lot about Kartarpur Sahib, which falls on the other side of the border. And he lived like a householder. He farmed the land. He got a community together who would, sing the praises of God. He started the communal kitchen of the langar, and so on and so forth. So it was really a practical way, a practical religion, as it was called. This was religion as anubhav, how to live life in the right way. So that, in very short, is something. Of course, one can go on for hours about this, but this is what this book tried to capture in very simple language, and I'm glad that this book survived up to the 550th anniversary of its birth last year, and it's now also come out in Hindi as well as in Punjabi.
Yeah, one of our viewers, Akashdeep Gill, is asking you, Navtej, is the visit of Guru Nanak to Jerusalem authentic?
I have spent a lot of time in Jerusalem, and one of my books, that's Indians at Herod's Gate, is about the Sufi Khanka, or the Indian hospice that became, which goes back to the time of Baba Sheikh Farid, who went from Punjab and meditated in a cellar there. And my book is about that Indian hospice. And to bring it back to your question, my thought was the same, that if Guru Nanak went to Hajj, to Mecca, Medina, and this is the route that the pilgrims used to take. They would often go by ship or boat from Karachi to Jeddah and then to the Hajj, and then come back through Jerusalem, Baghdad, by land. So he's documented to have gone to Baghdad. And he went to Mecca, Medina. Whether or not he went to Jerusalem, I was unable to find anything. My hope, it was more a hope than anything else, and it perhaps wishful thinking, or just instinct, was that if he had gone to Jerusalem, as a lot of holy men used to go in those days, then where would he have gone in Jerusalem? He would have gone to the Indian corner. He would have gone to the place of Baba Farid, because Baba Farid's couplets are included in the Granth Sahib. So there are 100 odd couplets of Baba Farid which are included in the Granth Sahib. So he was familiar, not that he put together the Granth Sahib, but certainly he was familiar with the teachings of Baba Farid, because Baba Farid was a big figure, Sufi figure in Punjab even at that time, 300 years before Guru Nanak. So if he went to Jerusalem, he would have gone to that place. And that is why I spent a lot of time in that place. But unfortunately, we'll have to leave it to more diligent researchers to actually find some documentation for that.
So this conviction of yours finds a place in this book, Indian at Herod's Gate?
It mentions it in passing as a question. That did he come here? I don't know.
Yeah. So now this hospice is being managed by the family of the fellow who set it up?
Well, it started in the 12th century when Baba Farid went there. Then his followers started going there, and they got the land as waqf. And then through the centuries, it was added on by different sheikhs who would be the director of the hospice, so to speak, or the person who runs the hospice. Hospice is like a dharamsala, and Jerusalem is full of dharamsalas like this. So, there is the Swiss hospice, there's the Russian hospice, there's the Uzbek hospice, there's the Afghan hospice, the Austrian hospice. So similarly, Indian Sufis used to go, because Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is the third most revered place for Islam after Mecca, Medina. So they used to always go there. So the director or the sheikh would succeed each other through the centuries. Then it fell into disuse for about 2-3 centuries, until the beginning of, after Jerusalem was freed from the Ottomans in 1918, a delegation of Muslims, notables, came from Jerusalem to India to take money from the rich Indian princes to go and repair the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And when they were here, they told the Indian Muslim leaders like Ajmal Khan and Dr. Ansari, etc., that there is this Indian place, why don't you send someone there to take care of it? So they sent one Sheikh Nazir Ansari from Saharanpur and said, you go and take care of it. So Sheikh Saab went there. He left his wife and 2 daughters here. He went there. He married a Palestinian woman and then he married 2-3 other Indians, including 2 Indians. And then he had this large family, but he entirely repaired the hospice. And during the second, and pilgrims started going again and staying there. During the Second World War, Indian soldiers used it as an R&R place. And thereafter, the hospice has gone through different phases. In 1967, it got bombed in the Arab-Israeli war. But now it is again run. This director is still the son of that sheikh. He is well into his 80s. And it's a family which holds Indian passports. They fly the Indian flag on 7,000 square yards in a very, very contested old Jerusalem. And it's a grand place. And they have several rooms there where you can go and stay with hardly any charge. And now there's not so many pilgrims, but writers, artists, poets, go and visit there and stay there. So it's still run in technically by still Indian family, although they're half Palestinian.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Kaveri, now we come to your latest masterpiece, The Tainted. And when are we going to get it in India? Please tell us something about it. It seems very interesting. Set in 20 and 80 and started in Jalandhar. Then you moved to Nilgiris. And Nilgiris is such a lovely place, and you find Anglo-Indians there. And I've spent a year there doing a course in next to Kunur, this place called Wellington. And so let's. I mean, I don't want to take the wind out of the sail because it has to. But the plot of The Tainted.
Kansab, that's what the book looks like. I think the Indian edition will have a different cover. So it's going to be out in India, late December, early January, and it's being published by Speaking Tiger in India. The Tainted is the story. It's the fictionalized retelling of the mutiny of the Connaught Rangers. They were very, very famous regiment in Ireland. In Ireland, and they were stationed in India in 1920. And when they were in India, the Irish Catholic soldiers in that regiment, they mutinied because of what was happening in Ireland, with Ireland's own freedom struggle. So my book is loosely based on the mutiny, but mainly I talk about the aftermath of the mutiny, because a lot of Irish men left behind children. Over the 300 years of the British Raj, there were so many Irishmen served, in civil life, as administrators, as traders, in tea companies, jute companies, but they also were in many, many Irish regiments, which were part of the British Raj. So, a lot of Anglo-Indians can trace their paternal line to Irishmen. So, though I didn't intend to write about Anglo-Indians, but as I started the story, this happens so often to a lot of people writing fiction. You start with one intention, and then the characters just sort of, take over the book, and then they take you down a completely different path. And that's kind of what happened to me. I intended to write this story very detailed about the mutiny itself, but I ended up actually, the mutiny is only the start of the book. The bulk of the book is about what happened after the mutiny, and the fate of so many, children that were fathered by Irishmen, over many years. But of course, in the book, I'm dealing with one specific family. And I think, I hope I've done it justice. I hope I've, given voice to, the Anglo-Indian community who, have been sort of not very well treated in India over these years. And yet, so many of us were educated by them, were taught by them. They ran our railways. They ran. They were so much part of modern India, and yet they weren't really very well treated because they were mixed race. So I mean, I hope this book, brings that the question of mixed race people, into conversation, both in India and in Ireland, because even in Ireland, in modern Ireland now, there are, like, for example, my own children. I know, they're grown up now, and I know my grandchildren will be of mixed race, because I know my children, they're dating Irish people, and I'm assuming at some stage, they'll have their own children, and I will have mixed race grandchildren. So for me, this, all the issues that are tackled in the book are very, very personal. They were never, I never started the book, for it to be like that, but it's ended up being, very close to the issues that are going to, I'll have to confront, and my children will have to confront.
Okay, great. We wish you Godspeed. The hope this book is as popular as the earlier two, and even more. And I must tell you that both of you are here for your talent, your intellect, and your achievements. And I am here because of my erstwhile profession to ensure discipline and make sure that in these 40 minutes we pack up everything. So we have a question, Tej. We want to know about this wonderful piece that you've written, The Exile. And somehow this untold story over a period of time about Maharaja Dalip Singh has been unraveled by you in a very wholesome manner. Though people are writing parts of it but about Maharani Jindal and all, could we tell us about? And I'm very anxious to know about the story of Kohinoor.
Well, that's the book with its recently rejacketed cover. But yes, this book was, I mean, it was a long time in the making, and it was a story which one had heard of. As you said, everybody sort of hears about this person, but everybody has different views about him. And when I started looking for him in history books, I found that he was merely a footnote, and mostly written by Britishers, and in a rather patronizing manner, he was referred to as a kind of a buffoon, a womanizer, a drunkard, who, various people. And even in our own country and in Punjab, there are very mixed views. A lot of people said that, this guy changed his religion, useless chap, he got converted and all that sort of. But I was very intrigued by the personality of Dalip Singh and the unfortunate circumstances in which he was basically became a plaything in a large political set piece. And he actually, so then I started digging up and reading more. And then I thought the best way of telling the story was a novel, because in that I could bring the emotions, I could bring his psychology, and I picked different narrators who it's mostly are all real people, but there's some of their minor characters and their roles have been expanded, like Mangla, who was Maharani Jindan's slave girl, one of her slave girls. She's been given a big role, and she saw him as a child and what happened. And then his valet, Arur Singh, who again is a bit role in history, but here he gets a bigger role. So I tried to then, everywhere it's in these different voices, it tells his story. It adds the emotional and psychological dimensions, but it doesn't change any history. So all the dates are correct, all the events are true to history, and a lot of the conversations are also actually based on his letters. So they've been converted into conversations. So this story, essentially, he was a young child when the British annexed Punjab. And they annexed it by a whole series of deceptions, Lord Dalhousie, etc. And when they took away the Tosha Khana, along with that, they took the Kohinoor. And he sort of signed it off as part, he was a child, so they signed a treaty of annexation in which he gives away the Kohinoor because he had no choice. And then Dalhousie sort of stuck it into his belt, a special belt which is of chamois leather, which his wife had prepared for him, and he stuck it into it personally and traveled under great security from there to Bombay, and then sent it off to Queen Victoria. So that is how the Kohinoor left India. Dalip Singh does see it once again in Buckingham Palace when he's posing for that famous portrait by Winterhalter, which you all see of Dalip Singh, showing him as a very tall, handsome man. And then Queen Victoria actually wanted to show him the Kohinoor, and she showed him the Kohinoor, by which time it had been cut and chopped by diamond cutters, because the European idea of a diamond was very different than an Indian idea. Oriental idea of a diamond was bigger the better. And the European idea was how much does it shine? So they cut off several carats of that precious diamond and made it shine. So he did see it again, but then it went off into the Queen's crown and so on and so forth. It's a very, very touching, tragic story, but he does recover his personality. He does rebel. Again, he's a late hero. He rebels. He gives up Christianity. He converts to Sikhism again. He tries to launch a conspiracy with the Germans, the Russians, the French, all sorts of people. Of course, he fails, and ultimately he dies in a rather dismal circumstances, alone in a hotel in Paris.
Yes, yeah, that's yeah. That would it should be an interesting read for everybody. It is catching steam now. Before we end this session, your writings, actually speaking, these are frankly tracing footsteps, are an inspiration to the younger lot wanting to enter the literary world. How would you, guide towards motivation, and how does one ignite the creativity in oneself? I a few words from both of you for the younger lot. Kaveri, please.
Okay. Kansab, what I would say is that, for any young writer starting out, first of all is, you need to really read a lot. You need to be a really good reader. Read as much as you can. And I was just saying this yesterday elsewhere as well, that, you have to give up being a literary snob and read every kind of book. I think the more you read in every kind of genre, whether it's history or whether it's thrillers or comics or, any kind of book is what is my advice. And I think that's where you start. You start, your writing career starts by being a big reader. That's one thing. And the other thing I'd quickly say is that, there are stories actually all around you, even in your own family history. So, there's fiction that can be written out of any of those little nuggets that you might glean from your grandparents or uncles and aunts. There are stories particularly in India, the stories all around you. So that would be my little bit of advice.
Thank you. And Navtej?
Well, I think the first thing was exactly what Kaveri has said: read, read, and read, because until you read, you can't write. I mean, that's the first thing. That's a given. And I think the second thing was, again, the second point, that there are stories all around you. I just share one very small anecdote, which when I was searching for a subject of my first novel and my little book on folktales of Poland had come up and was being launched at the Polish embassy, I saw an old gentleman sitting quietly in one corner. And somebody nudged me and said, "That's Mulkraj Anand." So Mulkraj Anand was sitting there. I had no idea how he had come there. He had come to that launch. So I went up to him and introduced myself and said, "I want to write a novel, but I don't know what to write about." This was way back in 1991. And he said, "Write simple thing." He said, "Write about yourself." And I said, "Myself? But everybody says you shouldn't write about yourself." He said, "If you can't write about yourself, how can you write about anybody else?" And he left it at that. And ultimately, I think that's what happens. You have to write you have to write about things you know best. And then you get the authenticity and you get the feel of what you're writing. You can't write about something which you don't know. So I'll leave it at that.
Very much. It's been such a pleasure interacting with both of you, and I'm sure our viewers, though there are some questions, but I think we are running out of time, and I am slightly intrigued by one observation which I had with one of Kaveri's interviews. She says, "When I'm playing golf, I am thinking about my piece." I'm intrigued because if I take my mind off the ball when I'm playing, my opponents lynch me. So I want to get to know how this happens. This can't happen. This gardening, I can understand. You see, but golf, oh my God, it's meditation. Thank you very much, both of you. It's a pleasure. And we wish you from the CLS side Godspeed in all your future endeavors. May a lot of works from you come about, fiction from Kaveri and wide canvas of work. Tej, thank you. Nice of you to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Saab. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
As Ambassador of Ireland to India, I'm delighted that Ireland is the country partner for Chandigarh Literary Society's digital edition of Literati 2020.
and gentlemen, it's an absolute honor and a great pleasure to welcome Embassy of Ireland as country partner to Chandigarh Literary Society Digital Edition Literati 2020.
We hope that you enjoy learning more about the connections between our two great national poets, Yeats and Tagore, and Kauvari Madhavan's fictionalisation of the Irish Rebellion, which took place in Punjab a century ago.
Well, after watching those Wilderness Ireland promos, definitely Ireland is a new addition to my travel list. And if I scroll to the right side of my screen and look at the comment sections, so Vikram Jaitka ji and Nazam Riyar ji, they send us heartwarming and wonderful words of appreciation. Thank you so much for your love and for your support from the bottom of my heart. And if I scroll down a little, Simran Puri ji says, Navteet Sarna's book, The Exile, is a well-researched book and such a pleasure to hear him now. We're glad, ma'am, that you enjoyed the session and, nothing like it when our viewers appreciate the sessions put forth by Chandigarh Literary Society. And Sita Sumaya ji also says that I am reading Kaveri's book and loving it. She has put in huge amount of research into it. Definitely, we could witness that in the session that we just saw, and it's amazing to see our viewers engage so wonderfully in this digital edition. Now, if we would have been at the lake like each year, we would have clicked lots and lots of pictures and put them on the gram, which is the Instagram and all our other social media. So why should anything be different this year and right now? Why don't you take that smartphone of yours and click a few pictures with your laptop screen with the sessions going on, and post them on your social media with the hashtags, hashtag Literati 2020, hashtag Digital Litfest 2020, hashtag CLS. And we would absolutely love to hear from you. And while you do that, let me now take you to the next session of this evening. तेरी मिट्टी में मिल जावा, गुल बनके मैं खिल जावा, इतनी सी है दिल की आरज़ू. ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਰ ਹੋਈਏ, ਇੱਕ ਰੂਹਾਨੀ ਤਾਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਜੜ੍ਹਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜੇ ਰੱਖਦੀ ਹੈ. ਸਾਡੀ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਦੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਦੇ ਦੁੱਖ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਦਿਲ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ. ਹੁਣ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਇਸ ਮੰਚ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਨਵਾਈਟ कर रही हूं हमारे 3 ऑथर्स को जो कि काफी प्रख्यात और काफी अकम्पलिश्ड हैं. First up is Amandeep Sandhu ji, best known for his 2 novels, Sepia Leaves and Roll of Honor. And he's a writer based in Bangalore. So like I mentioned early on the festival that we are coming to you from different parts of not just India, but many other continents. So he's coming to us from Bangalore. He also writes for Caravan, Scroll, The Hindu Business Line, and many others. An Academy's Kloss Solitude Fellow. His recent short e-book, which was titled Bravado to Fear to Abandonment, Mental Health and COVID-19 Lockdown, which was based on India's mental health, has recently been released and is doing very well. Welcome to you, Amandeep Sandhu ji. And next on our panel is Sarpreet Singh ji, who's a writer, a podcaster, and a commentator. And he's also the author of the best-selling book, The Camel Merchant of Philadelphia. Well, that sounds very interesting from its title. You must give it a read. And he's the writer-narrator of the Story of Sikhs podcast, which has listenership in not 1, not 10, not 20, but in over 90 countries. Imagine how good it must be. His upcoming book, Night of the Restless Spirits, my apologies, is a collection of short stories that attempt to capture the 1984 massacre in all its complexity and contradiction. A very warm welcome to you, sir, as well. And leading the panel is our moderator, Dr. Rasik Priya Sandhu. Dr. Rasik Priya Sandhu is an ophthalmologist by profession with work experience in charitable hospitals. And she's an avid reader and is always encouraging others to take up the habit. well, what's there to not take up reading? Reading diversifies us as people, and it makes us better conversationalists as well. So over to you, Rasak Priya ji, to take this panel forward, and looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you for that introduction, Niharika. Sat Shri Akal. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to our session, Pain and Pride, Punjab's Journey Through the Years. I'm Rasikpriya Sandhu, and joining me are Amandeep and Sarpreet Singh. Before we start, I'll just take a minute to talk about Amandeep and Sarpreet Singh's books, respectively. Last year, Amandeep published the book, Punjab, Journey Through the Fault Lines. It's a wonderfully researched, vast and exhaustive piece of work. It covers a multitude of topics and has been shortlisted for a lot of awards. Mr. Singh's debut novel, The Camel Merchant of Philadelphia, focused upon the role of foreigners in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court, and he's recently published Night of the Restless Spirits, for which I would like to congratulate you.
Thank you.
This is a beautifully written book, which is in the form of short stories, evolving around the horror of 1984, focusing upon ordinary people who were caught up in the chain of these catastrophic events. It's a dedication to all the nameless victims and the unsung heroes of 84. So I would like to welcome both of you and dive into the session right now.
Thank you very much.
My first question goes out to Amandeep. Amandeep, in the title to your book, you use this very scientific term, fault lines. So what are these fault lines that you refer to when you talk about Punjab?
That is a longer answer question, and but here is a challenge to everybody who's listening. Give me a Punjabi term for fault lines. Unless I have the term, I can't publish the book in Punjabi. The translation is ongoing. So please suggest names. The book is a mix of Punjab, the way I saw it between 2015 and 17. And it has contextual history in it and also memoirs, because I thought only a mix of these three could actually make a book which would hold good as a book. There are 16 chapters, and the fault lines which I feel are not really the ones which have been talked about in political circles and economic circles most of the time. They are really the apathy of the state, both center and the state, towards the issues of the people. The anger among people over many injustices, past and present, ongoing. The issue of loans, which is really burdening Punjab. The issue of waters that is burdening Punjab. The issue of caste, which has plagued the Sikh society. The issue of being thrown out of the religion. The Sahajdari, Keshdari controversy. The issue of drugs. The issue of Punjab being a border state. These are the various education, health. These are the various points on which Punjab, God forbid, but Punjab can crack. And fault lines are actually the cracks on the face of a rock which lead to earthquakes. So it's my hope that this kind of a book brings us awareness about what is going on, and we manage to curtail the fault lines.
Okay, thank you for that, Amandeep. I also couldn't help but notice that all the three of us, we haven't really lived in Punjab in the last few years. So it made me wonder if that is the reason why we all gravitated towards our own roots, as if you're trying to fill some sort of void. So, Mr. Singh, I want to ask this particularly to you, especially being a part of the diaspora. Do you agree with that?
Yes, very much so. And I think my own personal journey mirrors that very significantly. I've actually never lived in Punjab. I was raised in Sikkim, where I was until I completed high school. And then I went to college in Rajasthan at Pilani, worked in Mumbai for a couple of years, and then moved to the US. So ironically, when I left India, I was the product of a typical, middle class, upper middle class Indian education, educated in so-called public schools. Really, I had no connection to my language, my culture, my faith. It was quite tenuous. And, my story is not unique. I think exiles driven by something or the other always tend to gravitate to their roots. And it was no different for me. So in a certain sense, I started discovering my roots in the diaspora. So your comment is very much spot on.
Right. Mr. Singh, we are going to mainly focus on your book since it's the newer book. I want to know what was it that made you write this book after 36 years? The events of 84 and 2020, 36 years have elapsed in between. What was that turning point for you?
Sure, I'll be delighted to address that. But first, I want to thank Amandeep for his graciousness and suggesting that we focus on my book because it's newer. Before I launch into that, I have a personal story to tell about a debt. One of the reasons why I'm a published author today is Amandeep. And I'm going to embarrass him by telling him the story. Several years ago, we were Facebook friends. We had never really connected. And I just reached out to him casually and I said, well, I have this collection of short pieces. They are book length. I'm looking for a publisher. Any ideas? Well, let me tell you this. My experience is that in a lot of contexts, people who are successful are never willing to help anybody else. And Amandeep was clearly an exception. The short version is that he connected me to one of his personal friends who's an editor at Westland, Karthik Venkatesh. And that was kind of the genesis of the Camel Merchant of Philadelphia. So I just wanted to acknowledge that debt at the outset. And I'm really delighted to be part of this panel with Amandeep and you. So I left India in 87, roughly 3 years after the events of 1984, because of my lack of a connection to anything Punjabi or Sikh, and because of the fact that I was at Pilani, sort of far removed from everything when the events of 1984 were actually occurring, I really didn't have a very strong personal connection to them. Even more so, the narrative in the Indian press at that time was very carefully controlled. Perhaps, in a lot of contexts, it might be called propaganda more than anything else. And let me explain what I mean by that. The narrative about November 1984 roughly went as follows. The Sikh bodyguards of the beloved Prime Minister assassinated her in retaliation for an attack on the Sri Harmandir Sahib several months ago, which was very necessary to rid the country of extremism and terrorism. And in retaliation, there was an outpouring of anger during which some Sikhs were targeted in Delhi and in other places. Did I believe that narrative? Absolutely. Lock, stock, and barrel. And why? Because we're talking about a time when the internet didn't exist, and we really didn't have any alternate sources of information. So the other thing was that while nobody in India at that time said that what had happened to the Sikhs in 1984 was good or even okay, a lot of people deep in their hearts felt that the Sikhs kind of asked for it. How can I say that with such confidence? Well, as a young Sikh man who had never lived in Punjab, that's how I felt. So that was my engagement with 1984. My epiphany came a few years later when I was in the US. Now, in the aftermath of 1984, of course, I knew that something had happened in Delhi. I had spoken to some cousins, who had to take shelter, and some of them had given up their turbans and their Sikh identity as a result of the violence of November 1984. And I had heard talk of this so-called Black Book, which had been written by human rights activists in Delhi, which told a starkly different tale of what had actually happened. I couldn't get my hands on it because it was not in circulation. I believe it had been banned. This was a booklet called Who Are the Guilty, which had been published by the PUCL and the PUDR, which are reputed civil rights organizations. Long story short, a few years later, as I was, quote, searching for my roots, I started engaging with 1984, and I started finding in my university library newspaper articles from the international press that painted a very different picture of what had happened. Being a skeptical young man, I really didn't believe them. I figured it might be, quote unquote, Western propaganda. That's when I stumbled upon two reports. One, the Black Book, Who Are the Guilty? The second one was Oppression in Punjab, produced under the aegis of Justice Tarkunde, retired from the Bombay High Court, that talked about Operation Blue Star and what actually transpired in Amritsar several months earlier. Both of these books were absolutely shocking, and they completely upended my view of what had happened. Now, these books were not from Sikh sources. They were from reputable human rights organizations. To me, they seemed fairly credible. And then I stumbled upon an article written by Madhu Kishwar called Gangster Rule, which had been published in her magazine Manushi. In sharp contrast to a lot of her colleagues in media, Ms. Kishwar had fearlessly written what had actually transpired in Delhi during those dark days in November. And her article corroborated the Who Are the Guilty booklet 100%. So now I had a couple of unimpeachable sources that told me that what had happened was very, very different. And it created a lot of turmoil in my heart. We're talking about, the 87, 88 timeframe. I'm a young man. I've just moved to the US. I stumbled upon an academic paper written by Delhi anthropologist Dr. Veena Das, who subsequently left India and taught at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Das had studied the families of Sikhs who had survived violence from the poorest neighborhoods in Delhi. They had been resettled in Tilak Vihar, which is in popular parlance known as the quote unquote widow colony. That's where a lot of the Sikh widows of Delhi 1984 were resettled. So Dr. Das presented a poignant account of several of the children who had survived and talked about their PTSD. One of the stories struck me in particular. It was the story of a young boy called Avtar who was deaf and mute. And unable to articulate his pain in any other manner, this child would use his hands and his body to mime out what had happened to his father. His father was lynched before the boy's eyes and hung from a tree until he died. So the turmoil that all of these things created in my heart, when I started learning about what had happened, poured out in the form of a story in verse, which is the 8th story in this collection called Kultar's Mime. So I fictionalized it and, Avtar became Kultar. I added the stories of other children and, some of the factual things that I had learned about 1984. And that was the genesis of Kultar's Mime. This was written, I would say, about 30 years ago, roughly. And a couple of the other stories in the collection, most notably the title story, Night of the Restless Spirits, was written around that time as well. Many years passed, I got busy raising a family with a career. My background is business and technology. And to give you the short version, about 6 years ago, my daughter, who was then a freshman student studying theater, decided to turn Kultar's Mime into a play. Much against my sage advice, I suggested to her that it would never work. Well, when we were done, we had presented the play 90 times in 6 countries, including twice in Delhi. And I was witness to an outpouring of compassion from people all around the world, and really tremendous catharsis from the Sikh community. That was really my inflection point. I dedicated myself to writing from then on, and wrote several other stories which now appear in this collection. The purpose of the collection was really to examine 1984 in all of its nuance. Of course, bad things happen to Sikhs, quote unquote, is an important part of the book because bad things did indeed happen. But the story of 1984 is not just the story of Sikhs who suffered. It's also the story of their non-Sikh friends and neighbors who often put themselves and their families at risk to save Sikh lives. It's the story of fearless government servants who put their careers at risk to save Sikh lives. So the attempt in this collection was to examine something as complex as 1984 in all of its nuance and from many, many different angles. I apologize for that long-winded answer, but I just wanted to give you the complete context of how this came about.
That's a very interesting story indeed. I want to ask both of you about your research process because Mr. Singh in particular, you going back about 36 years back into history. Aman, did you have a plan when you were researching your book? Did everything go according to that plan, or did you find things changing as you started along?
Well, my plan was very simple. I had drawn up a proposal and I just said I will roam around and there will be the book. But when I landed in Punjab, the farmer agitation over the white fly was going on. And just on the back of that, the sacrilege incidents happened. This was October 2015. And suddenly Punjab erupted in silent anger. There were hardly any violent incidents, but we remember in Punjab for weeks, we all got out, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, everybody, Christians, and we just protested saying Rosh. The administration disappeared. The ministers never came out. SGPC was stoned, when their officials tried to come because there was something murky in all those dealings. And it was deja vu for me to the time in 2007 when my mother was dying in Mandi Dabwali from cancer, and I could not come to Chandigarh to pick up morphine for her because that Baba Ram Rahim, he had annoyed the Sikhs with his Guru get up and all that. And Punjab was burning. And I look back at 84, and this is exactly what happens every time. That there is always a genuine people's protest, and then it is sidelined through a state-engineered religious intervention. 84, in my opinion, is about, the two aspects are known, that there was a law and order issue when the government had been suspended, but it was also about farmers' agitation, which was huge in March 1984. And in fact, even General Barar in his book says that we were scared that Punjab would stop sending wheat into the rest of the country. And so I said, what will you do? So you'll bomb Punjab to get wheat out of it? Punjab is not a food-producing colony of India, but that is how Punjabis feel. When all this happened, I really realized that my plans can go for a toss. I need to dedicate myself to actually traveling and learning and living with people and understanding. There were two things which I would just like to flag here, which I decided to do. One was to not shoot the messenger. Punjab is a lined mine of narratives. And I allowed myself to listen to all sorts of narratives depending upon the political position of a person. And the second thing I decided was not to go to the experts of Punjab. मैं किसे बोर्ड दे दरख्त दे थल्ले बैठ के पंजाब नहीं देखना चाहता था. I wanted to see Punjab in its grime, in its dirt, in its stench, and through its seasons and through my immediate experience on the ground. Third thing I really decided was to not make Punjab a pornography of pain. That is the kind of writing which the American publishing industry really valorizes. Punjab has so much pain. I believed that my readers will understand. If I say farmers have committed suicide, if I say boys have disappeared um, during and after the militancy year, if I say that these issues have happened, there are mothers waiting for sons, fathers waiting for daughters, people would understand it. I don't have to portray all the barbaric reality of Punjab.
Right. So Punjab is a labyrinth indeed. Mr. Singh, I want to ask you now, especially when you talk about Operation Woodrose, the army revolt, especially the incident in your book, the Ramgarh incident. What kind of research and testimonies did you rely upon?
So those are two separate stories. The Night of the Restless Spirits, the title story in the collection, is set at the Gurdwara Dukh Nivaran Sahib. I'll talk to both separately. Interestingly, right around 1984, I had actually heard of the massacre at Dukh Nivaran Sahib. My father, we were in Sikkim. My father used to do a lot of construction work for the military, and as a result, he had several senior army officers were his friends, and one of my uncles was a brigadier in army intelligence. So, in contrast to what was being published in the newspapers, he got pieces of information that I refused to believe. One of them was that there was a massacre at Gurdwara Dukh Nivaran Sahib, and I remember, my younger self scoffing at that time, saying, "You're just being brainwashed by Sikh militant propaganda. I mean, there was no Jarnail Singh Pindranwale at Dukh Nivaran Sahib. Why would Dukh Nivaran Sahib be attacked?" Well, today we know that Operation Woodrose was mounted and 40 plus other Gurdwaras were attacked at the same time. Also, my aunt had relocated from the US back to Punjab, and one of their friends was actually an eyewitness to the massacre. So I had a couple of data points, but I refused to believe them. And then subsequently, I learned that this had actually happened. So the Night of the Restless Spirits really came out of that little germ which had sat in my head for years and years. And, as I was researching my roots, I also engaged with the earlier history of the Punjab. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre made a deep impression on me. I had been reading a lot of magic realism at that time, and in particular, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude really, really spoke to me. And I felt that the effacing of massacres and violence perpetrated by the powerful from collective memory is as big a tragedy as the violence itself. So that was really the genesis of the story that is set in Dukh Nivaran Sahib, which really connects the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and Operation Woodrose, and then kind of expands the canvas to thread together the pain of Punjab over millennia, our unique geographic position as the gateway to the Indian subcontinent has resulted in great benefits, but also great pain over millennia. And this is a small story, but it has a large canvas, and it tries to thread all that together. The military revolt in Ramgarh, I was also aware of at that time. You might remember that, well, you wouldn't remember, but the older people in the audience might remember that there was some mention of it in Indian press, and then it kind of sank like a stone. The ostensible reason perhaps was that the Indian Army was and continues to be a highly respected institution, and the notion that there was a large mutiny in the Indian Army, which ended in a firefight, was not something that people really wanted to talk about. Now, this had also stayed in my head. The court-martial is one of the newer stories, and when I was writing it, I went out to research, and I found almost nothing. There's really been very little written about it that I could get my hands on. And then, the miracle of the age of the internet, I actually stumbled upon court-martial trial records of some actual NCOs and soldiers who were brought to book for the mutiny. And that's where some of the color in that story comes from. Of course, it's fiction. The backdrop is nonfiction, but the details are all, made up, quote unquote. So that's where, both of these stories came from.
Mr. Singh, there's also this chapter, I believe it's the second one, The General.
Yes.
I want to know, in your entire writing, is that an entirely fictionalized chapter, or is there any iota of truth to that?
So it's definitely fiction, but a lot of the things that I observed there, the sentiments of young Sikhs in the diaspora. Now remember, I wasn't in the US in 84. I arrived here in 87, 3 years after the fact. But I have talked to multiple people who were there at that time. And I would say that even in 87, when I was a young graduate student in upstate New York, I attended, informal events at people's homes, particularly religious events. I could still feel the tremendous anger that Sikhs in the diaspora still experience. The events of 1984 were fairly fresh. They were just 3 years old at that time. So how a young Sikh who has abandoned his identity re-embraces it, driven by the pain of 1984, and I won't offer any spoilers here, is fiction, but it's very much sort of, the sentiments are very, very real. And I had the opportunity to observe some of these firsthand. The other thing that's very real is, now we know from multiple sources that the so-called movement for an independent nation, Sikh nation in the West, had been very severely co-opted by agents of the Indian government that had a strong vested interest in, propaganda victories. And, I would urge people to do their own research. So some of the dirty tricks that you encounter in the book are a fictionalized version of things that I found in my research.
Right. So the chapter that stood out the most for me was Kultar's Mime. And I would really like it if you can read out something for the people joining us so that they can connect to what your book is all about.
Sure. I will read a very brief excerpt from Kultar's Mime. This is the story of a young girl. And as I said earlier, the story is told in verse. Yells and chants are heard afar, mingled with painful, agonized screams, as the pogrom continues in Tilak Vihar, brutality beyond our wildest dreams. Breath and gasps, eyes reflect her fears. Down her cheeks stream desperate tears. 4 times already the mob has come, can't shut out its early sinister hum. 4 times her father and brothers too rushed brandishing their shining swords. 4 times repulsed the angry hordes, but then more came and the mob grew. To hope for mercy they cannot dare. Their eyes are shut in silent prayer. Even louder now is the terrible hum. Once again they pick up their swords. An urgent beat sounds on death's drum. The river of reason the mob now fords, launches its final murderous attack. Each man to the wall now has his back. Try to protect the ones they love. What courage, what valor. But God above, even he looks away or has shut his eyes. There are just too many, they do prevail. To pieces is hacked each and every male. The women mute, shocked, cower like mice. Their peril so urgent, acute, and so real. Of satanic laughter they can hear a peal. She's never been so afraid in her life. She's too young and innocent to comprehend. As they come to her, waving stick and knife, she thinks they'll kill her. This is the end. All she can see is a huge circle of hands fingers that flex, squirm in lecherous glee, big hands, small hands, dark hands, pale hands, on all of them spots of blood she can see, the lascivious hands and their lewd dance. Realization comes to her in a single glance. She begins to tremble and frightfully shake as a firm hold on her body the hands take. This is from Kultar's mind.
That's a very beautiful and moving piece. Aman, I want to ask you, what is your take on 84? Is it anyhow different from Mr. Singh's?
No, not really different. I mean, I think it's a collective trauma of a whole people. Paji was a little older. I heard his other talk. He was at Pilani at that time. I was much younger, and I remember I was growing up in Rourkela, Odisha, and I remember everybody addressing my father as G, Sardar G. And I would always ask him, why do they call you G? Why do they call Mishra Uncle G? Why do they call Matthew Uncle G? Why do they call you Sardar G? And he used to say that the people consider the Sikhs to be the farmers and the soldiers of the country, and it is a respect from them. At 11 o'clock on 31st October 1984, my father lost his G, because that is when he was in the market and he was charged upon by people. Friend came home, Matthew uncle came home, took away his papers. He said these are very important. Another uncle sent a jeep home, a police uncle, and my father and mother were taken to the Gurdwara. There was a very, as Sarpreet Paji was saying, many civil servants actually rose up to the occasion. At that time, the ADM Rourkela was Mr. Behra. I met him later when I did Roll of Honor. He's the man who saved my parents. While that is true, and we are all engaging in the trauma, and we write about the trauma and all that, but my understanding of 84, everything that everybody writes, with all respect to it, we also need to start theorizing 84 in some ways. And the way I see it is this, that modern nations are based on the idea of Rousseau's social contract, which is what led to the French Revolution and the birth of the modern democracy. The social contract is when the government and the citizens engage in a contract with each other, saying that, okay, the government will not infringe on the people's rights, people's religious rights, people's other kinds of freedoms. And the people say yes, and we are happy to pay taxes to this government, give the charge of our security to this government. And that is how a social contract is built between citizens and the state. To me personally, 84 is my watershed moment, because I was 11 years old and it was completely, everything changed for me. But I think for the community, it was a rupture of the social contract between the Sikh community and the Indian nation state. It will take a lot of time, like it took Paji also to acknowledge it. It took me also a lot of time to really understand it. Now, two parallel things are happening here. One is we are coming to terms with this rupture of the social contract. And at the same time, while we are seeking justice, and justice is the only thing that can heal this rupture, 84 itself has been templatized by communal forces in the country. 84 was repeated in 92, 84 was repeated in 2002, 84 has been repeated multiple times, including just this February in Northeast Delhi. So we have to look at 84 as an emblematic, and we must not forget that there was Nellie massacre in 1983, just before 84. So this was the time when these violences became templatized in the hands of communal forces, and then you buy out the media, you suppress the courts from doing what they're doing, you curtail human rights activists behind bars, and you just launch police operations in which thousands disappear, human rights violations happen, and it just works. It continues to work. And this will remain an eternal struggle. In my humble opinion, I think we must, as Punjab, start looking at healing in many, many ways, and that is to admit that we are, somebody said here as well, and I also argue in my book, we, for the last 175 years, ever since the British took over 1849, the Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Raj, and then we had partition, and then we had 84, and our traumas are deep, and it is of the whole land of Punjab, which now has been shrunk into these 2.5 rivers. And so it's not really Punjab, this little Punjab.
So I just wanted to add a little bit to that. I really want to thank Amandeep for the observations that he just made. To me, 1984 is not a Sikh story at all. It's a human story, and in order to sort of narrow the focus a little, it is very much an Indian story. And it's important that when we talk about 1984, we absolutely recognize the weaponizing of sectarianism, which Amandeep described so eloquently. This is exactly why we need to focus on all the 84s, because focusing on them, talking about them unabashedly, is perhaps our best insurance against repeating them, particularly in a time when India has been completely seduced by a new muscular strain of chauvinism. I think I have a theory that the pandemic actually shifted attention from what was going on in the early part of the year. Like Amandeep just said, I was in India at that time earlier this year, and I could see a 1984 in the making before my eyes during the Shaheen Bagh agitation and when the students were attacked so brutally in Delhi. So that ultimately, I feel, is the role of art and literature. There are generations of Indians who have never read about 1984, and they never will. Think about it. Who has the incentive to write a chapter about 1984 in India's history books? Nobody. So that's where we writers, quote unquote, have to do our part of the job, so to speak. And, going back to Gabriel Garcia Marquez and his description of the Banana Company perpetrated massacre, this is what we need to focus on, so that as a society, we are sensitized to what happens when things break down, when the social contract, as Amandeep very eloquently described, breaks down. That is really my motivation. It's not so much to say bad things happen to us. We know that. The Sikhs know that bad things happen to them. But I think if anybody understands even an iota of the Sikh ethos, which comes directly from Guru Nanak, the whole point is not to care about your own pain, but the whole point is to care about everyone's pain. And that's what this work really tries to do.
It was very interesting to get both of your points of view on this. I'm born in the aftermath of 84. I'm actually born in 1988. So I think 84 is something that was sort of our inheritance. And as you said, 84 is not something that I read about in any history book. It was mostly in the form of oral tradition or old news weeks that I found lying at home. So both your works, they're really tremendous that they carry out a message to the young millennials in particular. So before we shut down, I would ask Amandeep, do you think Punjab has healed? Are these fault lines that you talk about, are they gone? And if not, what do you think needs to be done to heal Punjab?
That's a very long discussion. I don't have the answers, but you just see what is happening right now, right? The farm bills which came out. Now, Punjab has been tasked with a certain role in the nation's economy. It's been fulfilling it for the last 60 years. It is the granary of the country. Haryana, of course, West UP also. But now suddenly you are dismantling the mandi system. You are dismantling the entire structure through which Punjab's agrarian output will be regulated. And there have been protests going on now for 45 days. Trains are still stopped in Punjab, though farmers are not stopping them. The government is not allowed to stop them. when our abrogation of 370 happened, it was only Punjab that stood up with Kashmir, because Punjabis knew that this will happen with us also. And actually, it has started happening with us. How we deal with it, how we come together with it, these are longer discussion. We can't take it up right now, but there is indeed a conflict. Jang Hind Punjab the Hone Laga. That continues. That's been continuing for ages in Punjab.
Right. So with that, I would like to thank both of you, Amandeep and Mr. Singh, for joining us. Having read both your respective books, I would really recommend them to everybody out there who's not read them. Please go get your copies. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And thank you for doing such a brilliant job moderating the session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Oh, good morning to you.
I think both the location is absolutely great to talk about books and literature. It's a pleasant Sunday morning. I enjoyed my day here.
I had a wonderful time at Literati. Thank you so much for having me over. A beautiful venue and a wonderful audience. It was great interacting with you all. Thank you, Chandigarh, for having me over.
This is one of the nicest, most pleasant Lit Fest I have been attending this season. It's well organized. It has a large variety of the kind of authors. And of course, it's done this very, very beautiful venue of the Lake Club.
Absolutely fascinating. I loved being on the stage. You have a beautiful, wonderful, interactive audience, very alive, very aware, and I'm very grateful to have been called here.
So this is where we make an appearance again, and time flies isn't just a saying when you experience it in reality for yourself. So we just started the evening a couple of hours ago, and we are already at the last session of the evening, which is where I step into the other side of the dais and assume the role of a moderator. So that's going to be a little change for me. And the session that we have for you first, let me introduce our special guest this evening, Anuradha Goyalji, who wears many hats to pursue her three prime passions of business innovation, travel, and books. And she's the founder of Indie Tales, which is a leading bilingual travel media portal. And I must tell you, it's one of its kind where she documents her global travels in words, audio, and video formats. That's not all that's special about her. What's even more special about her is her Chandigarh connection, because she was here in her student life. And I need to tell you how experienced of a traveler she is. So I will just take the liberty of reading out one passage from her book this evening as a part of her introduction. Here it goes. India revealed herself slowly and steadily as I traveled across her mountains, rivers, coastlines, deserts, and ancient temple towns, and walked across her cosmopolitan cities. Every now and then, I discover aspects I was completely oblivious to. Every new visit to a place reveals a new dimension, no matter how small or insignificant the place may seem. Well, I want to read more, but in case I do that, we won't have time to talk to her. So a very good evening and warm welcome to you, Anuradha. I hope you're doing well.
Namaste, and thank you for inviting me. I've been to many literature festivals for my earlier book as well, and as a book reviewer. But let me tell you, it's simply a delight to be at Chandigarh Lit Fest, because it feels like it's my own. It's my city, my my festival kind of city. It's kind of a homecoming. So I'm really delighted to be a part of it.
Well, we're glad to have you, and I can't resist the urge to ask you this, because traveling is like homecoming to you, because you travel to fulfill your soul, from what I could gather while reading this book.
Yes.
So how have you been adjusting to this new life, where we're completely devoid of travel and we can't do much of that?
So I have a dual life, Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. So I have two versions. One when I'm traveling, when I kind of cut off from everything. I'm in the place wherever I am. So I'm just with the place with where I am. I reduce my social media time to like once in the morning, once in the evening before sleeping. I make two calls at home just to say I'm okay, you are okay, kind of calls, or if there is something urgent to be taken care of. Everything else is parked for once I'm back home. And once I'm back home, it's the life of a solopreneur because I have to run these 3, 4 websites. I do consulting, I do a whole lot of work, I conduct a lot of workshops, I speak at a lot of events. So all that, so my non-travel life is the life of a solopreneur where you are, everything from a peon to a CEO of your work, and you're chasing your clients, you're negotiating, you're doing everything that needs to be done. And as a blogger, you are everybody. You are the researcher, you are the traveler, you are the writer, you are the editor, you are the publisher, you are the PR, you are marketing, you are social media expert, all put in one. So that's my non-traveling life. But when I travel, I completely cut off and I'm 100% in the place where I am.
Well, I'm so glad I asked you that question because this is such a good way of being and living. So, whenever I get the chance to travel, I'm going to adopt that myself. And kudos to one man armies, I am pretty much one myself as well, where I'm doing everything on my own. So, I can quite identify with you. However, what I have also discovered is that you travel in many different ways. If I say that you have alter egos to the regular kind of traveling that any tourist or any traveler might do, visiting the usual monuments, the usual places, but you have a different way. So for you, the history of a place is revealed by the place that you travel to. History lies in geography. And that is the chapter that I'm referring to here in your book as well, where you make a very interesting note and observation that the two epics of Mahabharata and Ramayana, Mahabharata goes from north to south. And Ramayana goes from north to south, and Mahabharata traverses from east to west, and both of these meet at Kashi. Like this interesting observation, what are the other things that you discovered through your travel, and what else have you come to know of?
Okay, so my traveling or my style of traveling or the stage of traveling has been evolutionary. I started traveling just like everybody else as a leisure pleasure traveler. When I worked in the corporate sector, it used to be like get any weekend getaway, go out, have fun with friends and family, those kind of things. But slowly it gave way to being a curious traveler. Then it became more of an exploratory travel. Now it's almost reached a stage of researcher travel. So, but that has been a very slow evolution over all my life. So my writing journey has been 16 years, but I've been traveling all my life. I've lived in 10 states of India and 15 cities. So that has given me a lot of opportunity to interact with a lot of places very intimately. The way you can interact only when you live in a place and you adopt a place as home. So that has contributed my professions, IT profession, my father's profession in defense. That helped us live in many, many places and with many people to explore. So it has been a journey. But today, if you ask me how I travel, I do a lot of research before I go to a destination. I read up as much as possible. I also try to read a lot of scriptural references when I travel to Indian destinations because a lot of Indian history has not been documented. Our last 400, 500 years are probably documented to some extent, but anything before that, there is very, very feeble documentation. And some things have managed to survive through our folk culture or through our oral traditions or through our family traditions. But most of it is not really documented. So you have to really go and speak to the destination and hope that it responds and gives you something. So I do as much research as possible. I plan about 50-60% of my time in the destination, and I leave 40% for the destination to surprise me, do some magic, share something that I can't even think of, plan of. And once I'm back, it's all about, putting it together in whatever format it can be shared.
And I'm so glad that you're doing that, because the way we are taught history is sort of mechanical. We, leave out the more important parts. For example, here I am reminded of a small nugget that I read in the first chapter of the book, which is Stepping Outside, where you're explaining that earlier, as a child, temples would only mean marble structures to you in your worldview. It was the delicate marble. But when you to the south, it was not delicate marble which the temples were made of, but it was some other material.
It
And
was
you
hard
had
black stone.
yes, yes, and you had a little trouble accepting that definition as well. So, how do you think we need to change the way we look at history, or we need to change the way we take in and study history to be able to travel more mindfully?
Yeah, so Niharika, I would like to share a little journey of finding the history. So, when I started exploring from a historical perspective, I thought, everywhere I went and I discovered there were these brilliant kingdoms and kings which we were not aware of. I'd not even heard the names of. For example, I went to Assam and then I discovered these Ahom kingdoms, after which Assam is called Assam. It's actually Ahom, as they call it locally, and they ruled for 600 years. And we were told Mughals were the longest ruling, people in the world. So, so I would, initially think, why did they not teach me this? Why did they not teach me this? But as I kept going to different parts of India and as I kept discovering this, I figured out that India has so much of history, so many layers, so many dimensions that it's not possible to fit in. Of course, our history books need correction. There are no two ways about it, but there is no way that everything can be put in a set of books. And also at this point in time, I feel that India kind of reveals itself when you go out seeking it, and it reveals very differently to every person because it has so many dimensions and so many layers. There's no dearth of dimensions in which you can explore it, because it has been a land which has been lived for the longest possible time. We are the longest continuously living civilization in the world. So that much history is contained in our land.
Of course, I'm reminded of that famous saying by Rumi, what you seek is seeking you. So I think only as much of India will reveal itself to you as you're ready for it to do so.
Yes,
And,
yes. I'll give you an example from Chandigarh. Anyone who lives in Chandigarh goes to Pinjore Garden, and for us, all school picnics, college picnics, family picnics, everything was Pinjore. And right outside Pinjore, there is an ancient Bhima Devi temple, right outside the gate, 50 meters. We never saw it. I didn't even know of its existence. And now, when I discovered this March, I was in Chandigarh and I spent like half a day there exploring the museum and the temple there. I mean, it's in ruins, but still, it is the richest heritage of that region because not many temples have survived in that region. And then I started counting the temples. I realized Chandi Devi temple, after which Chandigarh is named, is very close by. Again, we not many of us know. I studied in Chandi Mandir and I never went to Chandi Mandir. I had to travel this distance to actually go and seek her and visit her. Then there are, that whole kshetra is a very strong Devi kshetra with Mansa Devi, Kalka Devi, and everything. But we never looked at this. I mean, I lived in that vicinity for so many years, but we never. So I was not. I mean, I would say the place existed. It's my vision which was lacking. It's my seeking which was lacking all these years.
correct. So I'm also intrigued by this fact. Often, when we embark on a leisurely travel, sometimes it remains just that to us throughout our lives. But here, there is an element of spirituality and history as well. So, did that later become an inspiration for you to keep traveling? And I'm sure your childhood must have had a bearing on the way you thought about these places spiritually as well, the way you document temples and the way you document religious places in your book.
So I discovered temples much later, like I said, So while growing up, we were pretty much like, any religious place. Our parents said, haath jod do, matha tek do. That's it. Any religious place. We didn't even know that they were different. places or their different religions really. I remember when I was studying in Punjab University, Chandigarh, and for a few years I was in the hostel because my dad got transferred and he was in another city. And we used to have this discussion on Sundays, a typical student discussion that, you know, you go to a temple, you get a little prasad, you go to a gurudwara, you get a full meal, you know, typical hostel kind of a conversation. If you go to a church, you get nothing, you know.
Of course.
That's how we looked at, that was our criteria at that stage of life. To distinguish between where to go and how to go, you know, as hostelers are always starving for food. So, but over a period of time, I realized that the Indian land cannot really be separated from spirituality, and pilgrimage itself has been a very, very long-standing tradition. You know, so unfortunately, in our tourism curriculums, they're all taught from a very, very Europe-centered, you know, view. Everything is taught as it should be in Europe, you know. So I think we need to start looking at our own tradition, because we've had documented travel traditions for at least 2000 years, if not more. We have yatras prescribed in our lifetime, the kind of yatras we must do, and the kind of places we must visit. And the way, if you really look at the prescribed travels, you will see that given the transportation modes of those days, you would have literally covered the whole of country. And if you really look at all our saints, start with Guru Nanak Dev Ji, he was the biggest traveler we know of. Talk of Adi Shankaracharya, you know, talk of any big saint, they were all big travelers. They were traveling around the country. They were traveling around, they were sharing stories, and they were connecting the country.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of our traditions and cultures can be understood if we travel mindfully and we really dig deep and we try and get to the root of why a tradition exists, or, you know, why is it relevant? Why was it relevant at that point of time? So here, since we are talking of culture, I am reminded of a small anecdote that you wrote in your book about the Kumbh Mela. And I think it's the perfect time for you to read that out to our audience, because if we talk about it, they might not be able to feel it in its entire essence. So why don't
you want me to read?
Of course, yes.
The beginning one, is it?
Yes, the one that is in the Stepping Forward chapter. Right.
Beginning at the end. Which one do you want me to read? The beginning, is it?
The beginning, the beginning. I think that's a perfect start to the book.
Yes. So in the cold January winter, I was standing amidst a million strangers in Prayag, observing the transient world from a transient land as a part of a cyclic event. The Kumbh Mela is a microcosm of the world as it is created, lived, and dissipated. On the temporary floodplains created by the receding waters of Ganga and the Yamuna, at the point of their confluence, a miniature world comes up for a couple of months. People from all over the country come here to spend time for various reasons. From the curious tourists who want to see the Naga sadhus to sadhus from different akhadas who come here to fulfill their periodic meeting with the world and other sadhus. It is the longest living cultural tradition of India. The scale may have gone up and down during different phases of history, but it has continued unhindered. Its power lies in the fact that no one owns it, and at the same time, it belongs to everyone. It belongs to the one who turns up to be a part of it. No one invites anyone, yet everyone turns up on the banks of Holy River on the right date and time. I guess.
Everyone, and so does the rich culture, tradition, and travels of India. They belong to everybody, but they reveal themselves in different ways.
Yes, and they reveal at the right time, I guess. When you are ready, they reveal.
True, true, true. And now, you know, we keep hearing stories throughout our childhood, and mostly we are familiarized with both the epics or a lot of history through stories which have traveled down the generations. But every place has a different version to it. For example, the Ramayana itself has 300 versions to it. While you were traveling throughout India, you must have also come across different versions to all these stories that we've known since childhood. And which was the most striking one that still remains with you? Which was the most intriguing one that, caught you by surprise?
So India is I mean, I could very easily call India the country of stories, because there is a story everywhere. Wherever you stand below a tree, there is a story there waiting for you. But what I found is that there are some stories which travel across the land with a slight variation here and there. So, for example, I have mentioned there's a chapter in the book, the warp and weft of the stories that bind India. And in that, I have mentioned one of the stories is about a deity or a shivaling making an appearance when a cow starts going and giving milk. Now, I found this story in every nook and corner of the country where they say, this deity was found, or this shivling was found, in the below the earth, and we discovered it when a cow suddenly started going and giving milk there. And when they tried to see what is there, they found an ancient shivling or something. Now, to me, it was strange that you find the story everywhere with little variation. Sometimes it's a Shivling, sometimes it's a Vishnu, sometimes it's somebody else, mostly Shivling, but sometimes some other thing. And one of the places I found that, which is very close to Goa, where I live, on the coast, a particular Shivling used to come on a coast, and the fishermen would put it back to the sea. It kept coming, and then they left it on the beach, on a kind of a cliff, and the cow started coming and giving milk there, is what the temple priest says. So to me, these are a lot of these stories which keep repeating everywhere. Now, did they travel from one place to another? Did they replicate themselves everywhere? Is there a scientific reason behind how cows can detect these places? We don't know. I mean, probably we need to do a lot of research in these spaces or these stories. But what we must acknowledge is that all these oral traditions of these stories, they bind them together. And also, like I mentioned, in history belongs to geography, is that the story, the highlight of the story is where it belongs to. Okay, so if the hero of the story is, say, Krishna, then the story is most probably happening in Braj or in Dwarka. If the hero of the story is Sri Ram, then it is happening in the path where Sri Ram is. Pandavas are the only ones who have their footprints everywhere. I'm yet to find a place which doesn't have something related to Pandavas, whether it's documented or not. But people believe Pandavas came here. This is what they did. This is what they did.
Absolutely. I was reading through that and it's imprinted in my mind, the most deeply. I was going to ask you about that, but now that you've mentioned it, I think I'll move on to my next question. Or rather, let me just say the next remark, in this chapter, Warp and Weft of Shared Stories. You begin it with how any pilgrimage is incomplete without visiting Narmada. That is what people at the Narmada say, and that is what you keep hearing at every different place. But and also, when you go and tell them that I heard the story here or elsewhere, also people become a little offended.
Yes. So what happens is that initially, as a naive traveler, I would go. They'll say, आपने नर्मदा देख ली, अब आपको कुछ और देखने का जरूरत नहीं, आपका सब हो गया. Your pilgrimage is done. So it may have its root in the days when people couldn't travel to every other place. They probably travel to one or two of such places, and also for them that is the most important. You have to understand it's they live on the banks of Narmada or Ganga or Yamuna or Kaveri, and for them that is the ultimate river, the ultimate nurturer. Their life is sustained by those rivers. So for them, they are the most important. So it's like your parents are most important to you, mine are most important to me, and both of us are not wrong. So it comes with that connotation, and also the fact, if when you start reading scriptures, you also figure out that what is important is what is right now here. But right now, if I'm talking to you, you are the most important person in my life because you are the reality now. Everything else will come after we finish this conversation. So there is also a concept of being present in the moment and being with what you where you are.
Well, I think, we can't really emphasize the importance of being in the present moment a lot or much because the present is all that we have. And I think that's why it's called the present. It's truly a gift. You can't do without it. It's actually a gift.
And in fact, that's one of the lessons that travel teaches you. When you travel, you are in the present. You must disconnect with your past or with your home. It's very if you stay connected persistently, it's very difficult to be in the place. If you keep checking on what's happening back home, what's my social media status, it disconnects you from the place where you are standing. And that's why when you go to these remote areas where there is no connectivity and you can't do anything but be in that place, that's when you connect so strongly with the place. And probably that's why all the rishis, all the yogis, all the spiritual people, they go into these remote areas to disconnect and connect with the present moment. So travel is I mean, no matter for what reason you do, it is in a way a pilgrimage because you're trying to achieve something, you're trying to move ahead in your life.
I quite agree with that. So I just got briefly reminded of a trip that we've taken to Andamans, and Andamans does not have great connection, internet connection. So you're away from it completely, and because that happens, you are in the place. So we are being prompted that last 5 minutes remaining, and before we run out of time, I want to ask you about the title of the book, Lotus in the Stone. That's very unique to have as a title. Why? Because when I read it, I got reminded of the Lotus Temple here in Delhi. When somebody else reads it, they might get reminded of something else. So, was it intentional to make it so multidimensional?
So honestly, when I was working on the first draft, my working title was what is the tagline? Sacred Journeys in Eternal India. But I wanted wanted a title which will be intriguing. My earlier book was called The Mouse Charmers, and it really intrigued people into picking up the book. And I wanted something that. So when I gave this my first draft to a very close friend of mine to read, her first comment was that it's like opening the petals of a lotus. And that's how the lotus got into my psyche. And then I said, okay, we're talking about a lot of structures, monuments, temples. So that's stone. And if I really look at my journey, I went looking for ruins and stones, and what I discovered was lotus. And again, lotus is a very, very ubiquitous symbol. You find it engraved almost everywhere in all monuments of all kinds across the ages. If you travel in the hinterlands of India, especially in the eastern side, you will find vast the lotus ponds. There are these huge lotus ponds covered with green leaves, and if you take a walk in the morning, there are like beautiful lotus flowers flowering. So I thought that lotus kind of is represents this land also, and lotus is also associated, so every time we talk about Buddha, lotus comes. Every time we talk about Lakshmi, with lotus comes. So I thought it was symbolic that in these stones, in the monuments, look beyond the stone, and inside you'll discover a lotus. And lotus we also associate with our chakras, our body chakras. So multiple dimensions kind of came together to form the title.
Well, that's fantastic to hear because I get to listen to another layer of the title and how deep rooted it is. Before we just quickly close and sign off, I want to take a minute to acknowledge the wonderful comments that have been coming in. Hema Singh ji just wrote to us that Lotus in the Stone is a must read for all Indians who want to understand how spiritual India entrances and enchants those who truly seek her. I can quite agree with you there. We actually have to do that. What we seek is seeking us, but we have to be ready for India to reveal herself to us. And Vikram Jaitka ji says that I have learned so much today. Thank you, Literati. one connects with great minds. Truly, Vikramji, it has been a delight to hear from you. And Arunji says, good to see Anuradha ji. Always a pleasure listening to her about her travel stories.
Thank you, Arunji.
We can't get enough of that, but time is short, so I will just sign off with this line from your book, Anuradha. If you just permit me, I will just read this. India never ceases to amaze me, and this is my biggest motive to keep traveling and to keep exploring her. And here's wishing our readers great explorations and great travels across the country. And before you go traveling, read this book and read Anuradha's blog in details. And I'm sure you'll be traveling with a much more deeper motive and, a deep-rooted philosophy and spirituality. Thank you so much, Anuradha, for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Niharika, for inviting me and lovely questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the next 2 days of the festival, I'll try and join as and when possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. Looking forward. And now for our viewers at Literati. So this is the end of day 1, but picture abhi baki hai mere dost, jaise hamesha kehte hain. Picture में आगे क्या आने वाला है उसका एक छोटा सा ट्रेलर हम आपको दिखाते हैं अभी.
Without getting into that complexity, essentially when an Indian uses the word dharma, it means trying to do the right thing.
The name of the game is not to seek that autograph and then keep it forever, but it is to respect that loving father, the mother, the brother, the colleague, the person that we are walking with, that friend who's around us.
I consider it my duty to help those people who are below the poverty line without thinking of any award, reward, recognition. No, because I have enough. Even though it is not there, it is ultimately the people actually.
So, वो पैगाम दा जाना चिट्ठी दे विच ज़्यादा चाम. मेरा कहने दा मतलब कि एक खूबसूरती जी खत्म हो गई, चौ जे खत्म हो गए WhatsApp दे ज़माने में.